Hello everyone, welcome to What If Ayanokoji Started live in relationship with Suzune Horikita after school movie. Before we start, please go support Ann7442 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken character's gender, but of course Ayanokoji is a male. Chapter 1 After graduation. 5 years had passed since Kiyotaka Ayanokoji and Suzune Horikita graduated at the top of Class A from the Advanced Nurturing High School. Those years had been transformative, filled with challenges and triumphs that neither of them could have anticipated. But through it all, they had remained steadfastly together, growing closer with each passing day. Their home was a testament to their shared journey, a beautiful, modern house nestled in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. It was spacious but not ostentatious, reflecting both Kiyotaka's minimalist tastes and Suzune's preference for elegance and simplicity. The walls were adorned with subtle decorations, a few framed photos of their time at school, and moments from their travels. The house was more than just a place to live. It was a sanctuary where they had built their life together. It was a late Saturday morning, and Kiyotaka was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Despite his vast wealth, which had only grown after his father's imprisonment and the subsequent control he had gained over the Ayanokoji estate, Kiyotaka preferred a simple life. He had chosen to be a stay-at-home husband, a role he had surprisingly come to enjoy. Suzune, on the other hand, had pursued a career in corporate law, quickly rising through the ranks thanks to her relentless drive and sharp mind. As he whisked eggs in a bowl, Kiyotaka's thoughts drifted to their recent conversations. Lately, they had been talking more and more about their future, specifically, the possibility of starting a family. It was a topic that had initially surprised him. Suzune had always been fiercely focused on her career, and he hadn't been sure if she would want to have children. But as they had discussed it, Kiyotaka had seen a different side of her, one that was softer and more vulnerable. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he looked up to see Suzune entering the kitchen, her hair slightly tousled from sleep. She was dressed in a simple robe, and there was a relaxed air about her that he loved seeing on the weekends when work wasn't at the forefront of her mind. "Good morning," Kiyotaka greeted her, setting the bowl of eggs aside to focus on her. "Good morning," Suzune replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She walked over to him and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek before glancing at the breakfast he was preparing. "You're spoiling me again." Kiyotaka chuckled softly. "I enjoy it. Besides, you work hard all week. You deserve to be spoiled on the weekends." Suzune shook her head, though the smile on her face grew wider. "You're too good to me, Kiyotaka." "I could say the same about you," he responded, his tone sincere. They fell into a comfortable silence as Kiyotaka returned to cooking and Suzune moved to set the table. It was a routine they had perfected over the years, a quiet dance that reflected the deep understanding and affection between them. As they sat down to eat, Suzune hesitated for a moment before looking up at Kiyotaka with a thoughtful expression. "Kiyotaka, about what we were discussing the other night." Kiyotaka met her gaze, knowing exactly what she was referring to. "You mean the possibility of having a baby?" Suzune nodded, her expression serious but tinged with uncertainty. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately. About what it would mean for us, for our lives." Kiyotaka set his fork down, giving her his full attention. "And what are your thoughts?" Suzune took a deep breath, her eyes flickering with a mix of emotions. "I've always been focused on my career, on achieving my goals. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that my priorities have shifted. We've built something wonderful together, and I want to share that with a child. I want us to have a family." There was a vulnerability in her voice that Kiyotaka rarely heard, and it tugged at something deep within him. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Suzune, if this is something you truly want, then I'm with you all the way. We've always faced everything together, and this would be no different." Suzune's grip tightened on his hand, her eyes searching his for any sign of doubt. "Are you sure, Kiyotaka? This is a big step. It would change everything." Kiyotaka smiled softly, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I've never been more sure of anything. We've faced so much already, your brother, my father, the challenges of our careers. I know we can handle this too, and I want to take this step with you." Suzune's eyes softened, and she let out a small, relieved sigh. "Thank you, Kiyotaka. I just needed to hear that." They spent the rest of the morning talking about what a future with a child might look like. Suzune, ever the planner, brought up practicalities, timing, her career, how they would balance their lives with a new addition to the family. Kiyotaka, in his usual calm manner, assured her that they would figure it out together, just as they always had. As the day wore on, they found themselves sitting on the couch in the living room, the remnants of breakfast forgotten on the kitchen table. Suzune leaned against Kiyotaka, her head resting on his shoulder as they talked about their dreams for the future. It was a rare moment of openness for Suzune, who had always been more reserved, but with Kiyotaka, she felt safe enough to share her deepest thoughts. "Kiyotaka," she murmured, her voice soft, "do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't met? If we hadn't ended up in the same class?" Kiyotaka's arm tightened around her, his expression thoughtful. "I do sometimes. But I can't imagine it being anywhere near as fulfilling as this. Meeting you changed everything for me, Suzune. I don't think I would have been truly happy if our paths hadn't crossed." Suzune smiled, a rare, genuine smile that she reserved only for him. "I feel the same way. You've shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to let them into your life completely. I never imagined I'd find this kind of happiness." They fell into a companionable silence, content just to be in each other's presence. Outside, the afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the house, and the world seemed to slow down, allowing them to savor the moment. As the day turned into evening, they decided to take a walk through their neighborhood, enjoying the crisp autumn air. They talked about everything and nothing, their hands entwined as they walked down the tree-lined streets. When they returned home, the topic of their future child came up again, this time with more certainty and excitement. They talked about names, about the kind of parents they wanted to be, and about how they would decorate the nursery. At night, as they lay in bed, Kiyotaka held Suzune close, his thoughts drifting back to all they had been through. It hadn't been an easy journey, but it had been worth every challenge, every hardship. Now, as they looked toward the future, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together stronger and more in love than ever before. As Suzune drifted off to sleep beside him, Kiyotaka pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, feeling an overwhelming sense of contentment. They had come so far from their days at the advanced nurturing high school, and now, they were on the brink of a new chapter in their lives, one that promised to be filled with even more love and joy. And as he closed his eyes, Kiyotaka knew, without a doubt, that they were ready for whatever the future held. Chapter 2: A New Beginning. It was an unusually warm spring morning when Suzune Horikita found herself staring at a small white stick in the bathroom, her heart racing with a mixture of emotion she hadn't expected to feel so intensely. She had taken the test on a whim, a small part of her mind nagging at her after she'd noticed her cycle was late. She had tried to brush it off as stress or just an anomaly, but here she was, standing in stunned silence as the two faint lines began to appear. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, filling her with a strange blend of excitement, fear, and something she hadn't felt in a long time: pure, unfiltered joy. She hadn't known how she would react to the possibility of becoming a mother, but now, with the reality staring back at her, she felt an overwhelming sense of contentment wash over her. Suzune took a deep breath, steadying herself before slipping the test back into its packaging. She needed to tell Kiyotaka, and soon. But as she walked out of the bathroom, her hand instinctively rested on her still flat stomach, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Kiyotaka was in the kitchen, his back to her as he made coffee. It was their Saturday morning ritual. Kiyotaka would make the coffee, and they'd sit together on the couch, discussing their plans for the day. But today, Suzune knew, would be different. She approached him quietly, not wanting to break the peaceful atmosphere just yet. But when Kiyotaka turned around, his keen eyes immediately picked up on the subtle changes in her expression. "Suzune?" he asked, his voice gentle, but with a hint of concern. "Is everything alright?" Suzune opened her mouth to respond, but found herself hesitating. How could she put into words what she was feeling? How could she possibly convey the magnitude of what was happening? But then she saw the genuine worry in Kiyotaka's eyes, and the words came tumbling out. "Kiyotaka," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I have something to tell you." He immediately set the coffee mug down, closing the distance between them in a few quick steps. "What is it?" he asked, his voice now laced with urgency. Suzune bit her lip, suddenly feeling nervous. This was a moment she had never envisioned, and she wanted to get it right. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test, holding it out for him to see. Kiyotaka stared at the test, his expression unreadable at first. But then, as the reality of what he was seeing began to sink in, a look of pure shock crossed his face. He reached out slowly, taking the test from her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Suzune, he couldn't finish the sentence, his voice catching in his throat. Suzune nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes," she said softly. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Kiyotaka was completely silent, his mind racing as he tried to process the information. And then, much to Suzune's surprise, she saw tears begin to well up in his eyes. Kiyotaka, who was always so calm, so composed, was on the verge of tears. I don't know what to say," Kiyotaka whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Suzune, his gaze filled with a depth of love and happiness that she had never seen before. "I'm so happy, Suzune. I can't believe it." Seeing him like this, so vulnerable and full of joy, made Suzune's heart swell with love for him. She had never doubted his feelings for her, but seeing him react like this, almost crying at the news of their future child, made her realize just how deeply he cared. It made her love him even more, if that was even possible. Suzune reached up, gently wiping away the tear that had escaped down his cheek. "Kiyotaka," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "you're going to be an amazing father." Kiyotaka's hands trembled slightly as he placed them on her shoulders, pulling her close. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "And you," he whispered, his voice full of warmth, "are going to be the most incredible mother." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other, letting the magnitude of what they had just discovered sink in. The world outside their small cozy home seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them and the new life they were about to bring into the world. Finally, Kiyotaka pulled back slightly, his eyes searching Suzune's for any sign of doubt or fear. "Are you okay with this, Suzune?" he asked gently. "I know it's a lot to take in." Suzune smiled, her heart full to bursting. "I'm more than okay, Kiyotaka. I'm excited. I've been thinking about this for a while, and now that it's happening I can't wait to start this new chapter with you." Kiyotaka's smile widened, a rare and genuine expression of happiness. "Neither can I," he said softly. They decided to keep the news to themselves for now, wanting to cherish this moment privately before sharing it with the world. As the days passed, they found themselves talking more and more about their future, about how they would raise their child, and what kind of life they wanted to create for their growing family. In the evenings, they would sit on the couch, Suzune resting against Kiyotaka's chest as they discussed baby names, parenting styles, and all the little details that came with planning for a new life. Kiyotaka, who had always been calm and methodical, was surprisingly enthusiastic about every aspect of the pregnancy, often reading up on parenting books or researching the best baby gear. Suzune couldn't help but smile at his eagerness. She had always known Kiyotaka was someone special, but seeing him so invested in their future as parents made her love him even more deeply. He was going to be an incredible father, and she felt incredibly lucky to have him by her side. One evening, as they lay in bed, Kiyotaka gently placed his hand on Suzune's stomach, his touch tender and full of wonder. "Do you think they can hear us yet?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. Suzune chuckled softly, placing her hand over his. "It's still early, but I like to think they can feel how much we love them already." Kiyotaka smiled, leaning down to place a soft kiss on her stomach. "I can't wait to meet you," he whispered, his voice filled with love. As Suzune watched him, her heart swelled with emotion. She had never imagined her life would turn out this way, but now that she was here, she couldn't imagine it any other way. Kiyotaka was her partner, her best friend, and the love of her life. And now, they were going to start a family together. She leaned over and kissed Kiyotaka softly, pouring all of her love and gratitude into that one kiss. When she pulled back, she smiled at him, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you, Kiyotaka," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Kiyotaka smiled back at her, his eyes filled with the same deep love. "I love you too, Suzune," he replied softly. "More than anything." As they settled in for the night, holding each other close, Suzune felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over her. They were about to embark on a new adventure, one that would bring its own challenges and joys, but she knew that as long as they faced it together, they could overcome anything. And as she drifted off to sleep, Suzune couldn't help but smile, knowing that their love would continue to grow and deepen with every new chapter they wrote together. Chapter 3: Sharing the News. 6 months had passed since Suzune and Kiyotaka had discovered they were expecting their first child. The months had flown by in a whirlwind of preparations, doctor's appointments, and late-night conversations about the future. Suzune's belly had grown steadily, a small but undeniable bump that symbolized the new life growing inside her. The couple had settled into a new routine, one that revolved around their unborn child and the life they were about to bring into the world. But despite all the excitement and anticipation, there was one thing they had yet to do: tell their families and friends. It wasn't that they hadn't wanted to share the news. They had simply wanted to keep it to themselves for a little longer, to savor the secret and the intimacy of this new chapter in their lives. But now, with Suzune 6 months along, they knew it was time to let the people they cared about in on the news. It was a crisp autumn morning when Suzune decided to tell her family. She had been feeling the baby kick more frequently, and the reality of their growing family had started to sink in even more deeply. Kiyotaka had been nothing but supportive, always by her side, and she knew that now was the right time. They sat together at the kitchen table, the morning light streaming in through the windows as they prepared to make the call. Suzune's hand rested on her belly, her thumb gently stroking the fabric of her dress as she took a deep breath. Kiyotaka, sitting beside her, gave her a reassuring smile. "Ready?" he asked softly, his hand covering hers. Suzune nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's time." She picked up her phone and dialed her parents' number. The phone rang twice before her mother's voice came through the speaker, warm and familiar. "Suzune. It's so good to hear from you. How have you been, dear?" her mother asked, her voice filled with the usual concern and care. "I've been good, Mom," Suzune replied, glancing at Kiyotaka, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you. Something important." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Suzune could almost feel her mother's anticipation. "What is it, Suzune? Is everything alright?" Suzune took another deep breath, her hand tightening around Kiyotaka's. "Everything's fine, Mom. In fact, it's more than fine. Kiyotaka and we're expecting a baby." There was a moment of stunned silence, and Suzune could almost picture her mother's reaction, a mix of shock, joy, and disbelief. When her mother finally spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. "The baby? Suzune, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you both." Her mother exclaimed, and Suzune could hear the tears in her voice. Her father's voice came through the speaker next, equally emotional. "Congratulations, Suzune. This is incredible news. We're so proud of you." Suzune smiled, feeling the weight of her parents' happiness wash over her. "Thank you, both of you. We've been keeping it to ourselves for a while, but we wanted to share it with you now." Her mother's voice was full of warmth. "We can't wait to meet our grandchild. You and Kiyotaka must be so excited." "We are," Suzune replied, glancing at Kiyotaka, who was smiling back at her. "We're really looking forward to it." After a few more minutes of conversation, filled with questions and excitement, Suzune knew it was time to make the next call. As she hung up with her parents, she took another deep breath, bracing herself for the next conversation. "Kiyotaka, would you call him?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with nerves. "Of course," Kiyotaka replied, his voice reassuring. He picked up his phone and dialed her brother's number. Suzune had been close to her brother, Manabu, since they were children, but the idea of sharing such personal news with him still made her a bit nervous. The phone rang a few times before Manabu's calm, measured voice answered. "Kiyotaka. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Kiyotaka exchanged a quick glance with Suzune before responding. "Manabu, there's something Suzune and I need to tell you. It's important." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Manabu's voice came through, slightly more cautious. "What is it?" Kiyotaka handed the phone to Suzune, who took it with trembling hands. "Manabu, it's me," she began, her voice soft but clear. I'm pregnant." Another silence followed, longer this time, and Suzune could almost hear her brother processing the news. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of emotion that he rarely let show. "Pregnant?" Manabu repeated, his voice slightly shaky. "Suzune, that's incredible. I don't know what to say." Suzune smiled, feeling a wave of relief. "You don't have to say anything, Manabu. I just wanted you to know." There was a soft sound on the other end of the line, and Suzune realized with a start that her brother was crying. "Suzune, I'm so happy for you," Manabu said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't wait to meet my niece or nephew." Suzune felt tears prick at her own eyes. She had always known her brother cared for her deeply, but hearing him so openly express his joy for her was overwhelming. "Thank you, Manabu," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "That means a lot to me." They talked for a few more minutes, with Manabu asking questions and offering his congratulations. He also mentioned that his wife, Tachibana, was equally thrilled to hear the news, and they both promised to visit as soon as possible. After they ended the call, Suzune turned to Kiyotaka, who was watching her with a soft smile. "He cried," she said, still a bit surprised. Kiyotaka chuckled, reaching out to brush a stray tear from her cheek. "Of course he did. He's going to be an uncle, and he's happy for you. For us." Suzune nodded, leaning into Kiyotaka's touch. "I didn't expect him to be so emotional." Kiyotaka's smile widened. "It just shows how much he cares about you, Suzune. And about our family." Suzune sighed contentedly, resting her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. "I'm glad we told them. It feels good to share this with them." With their families now in the loop, Suzune and Kiyotaka decided it was time to tell their friends. They had kept in touch with many of their classmates from the advanced nurturing high school, and now, with the news of their impending parenthood, they wanted to share their joy with the people who had been such a big part of their lives. That evening, as they sat on the couch, Suzune leaned against Kiyotaka, her phone in hand. They had decided to make the announcement on Instagram, knowing it would reach everyone quickly and easily. "Ready?" Kiyotaka asked, glancing at Suzune as she typed out the post. Suzune nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Ready." She finished typing the message and then added a photo of the two of them, taken just a few weeks earlier. In the photo, Kiyotaka had his arms around Suzune, his hand resting gently on her belly, both of them smiling at the camera. The caption read. "We're excited to announce that we're expecting our first child. We can't wait to start this new chapter of our lives together." But the final glance at Kiyotaka, Suzune hit post, and they watched as the announcement went live. Almost immediately, the comments began to flood in. "OMG congrats. wrote Kushida. I knew you two would end up together. So happy for you. Added Harada. Even Ike, who was usually more reserved, commented, wow, I'm speechless. Congrats, guys. As they read through the comments, Suzune couldn't help but smile. Their friend's happiness was palpable, and it only made the moment feel more special. Kiyotaka wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer as they continued to read the messages of love and support. Everyone's so happy for us, Suzune said softly, her heart full. They are, Kiyotaka agreed, kissing the top of her head. And they should be. This is a big moment for us. Suzune sighed contentedly, resting her head on Kiyotaka's chest. I can't believe how far we've come since high school. It feels like a lifetime ago. Kiyotaka smiled, his hand gently rubbing her back. We've been through a lot, but we've always made it through together. And now, we're starting a new adventure. Suzune closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of Kiyotaka's heartbeat. She knew he was right. They had come a long way since their days at the advanced nurturing high school, and now they were on the brink of a new chapter, one filled with love, family, and endless possibilities. As they sat together, basking in the warmth of their friends' congratulations, Suzune knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And that, more than anything, filled her with a deep sense of peace and happiness. Chapter 4: A New Life. The anticipation had been building for months, and now, the moment had finally arrived. Suzune had gone into labor late in the evening, and the drive to the hospital had been a blur of nerves and excitement. Kiyotaka had been a pillar of calm, though his heart pounded with the weight of what was about to happen. Now, they were in the delivery room, and the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of tension and joy. Suzune gripped Kiyotaka's hand tightly, her breaths coming in sharp gasps as the contractions grew stronger. Despite the pain, her eyes were focused, determined. She had always been strong-willed, and now was no different. Kiyotaka stayed by her side, his presence steady and reassuring, offering her all the support he could. Just a little more, Suzune, the doctor encouraged, her voice calm but firm. You're doing great. Suzune nodded, her face glistening with sweat, and with one final, determined push, a sharp cry filled the room. The sound of their baby's first breath was like music to their ears. Kiyotaka's heart swelled as he looked down at the tiny, wriggling form the nurse held. It's a boy, the doctor announced with a smile, as she handed the baby over to Suzune. A flood of emotions washed over Suzune as she held their son for the first time. He was so small, his skin flushed and warm, his eyes squeezed shut as he continued to cry. But to Suzune, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked up at Kiyotaka, who was staring down at their son with an expression of awe. Kiyotaka, Suzune whispered, her voice trembling. Look at him, he's perfect. Kiyotaka was speechless, his eyes locked on the tiny baby cradled in Suzune's arms. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and gently touched his son's soft cheek. The baby's cries quieted, and his tiny hand instinctively wrapped around Kiyotaka's finger. It was such a simple gesture, but it broke something open inside Kiyotaka, and before he knew it, tears were streaming down his face. He's beautiful, Kiyotaka choked out, his voice thick with emotion. He had never imagined he could feel so much at once: love, pride, joy, and a profound sense of responsibility. This tiny human was their son, their family, and the thought overwhelmed him in the best possible way. Suzune watched as Kiyotaka cried, her own tears flowing freely now. She had always known that Kiyotaka was strong, but seeing him so vulnerable, so openly emotional, made her love him even more. She reached out with her free hand, gently wiping the tears from his cheeks. Thank you, Kiyotaka, Suzune said softly, her voice filled with love. Thank you for giving me this family. For being with me every step of the way. Kiyotaka leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Suzune's forehead. No, thank you, Suzune, he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. For everything. For our son. For being the strongest person I know. The nurse gently interrupted, offering to take the baby to be cleaned up and checked, but Suzune shook her head, holding her son a little closer. Just a moment longer, she pleaded, and the nurse nodded, understanding. Kiyotaka and Suzune stared down at their son, overwhelmed by the miracle of his existence. After a few moments, Suzune reluctantly allowed the nurse to take him, her heart aching with the sudden emptiness in her arms. But she knew he would be back soon, safe and sound. What should we name him? Suzune asked, turning to Kiyotaka as the nurse walked away. Kiyotaka had been thinking about names for months, but now that their son was here, only one name came to mind. How about Haruto? He suggested, his voice soft. It means spring, like a new beginning. Suzune smiled, the name feeling just right. Haruto Ayanokoji, she whispered, testing it out. It rolled off her tongue smoothly, and she nodded. I love it. When Haruto was finally brought back to them, freshly cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, Kiyotaka took him into his arms. Holding his son for the first time was a moment he would never forget. Haruto was so small, so fragile, and yet Kiyotaka could feel the strength of the life in his tiny body. He cradled Haruto close, feeling the warmth and the soft rise and fall of his tiny chest. Tears filled his eyes once more as he stared down at his son, unable to contain the depth of his emotions. Haruto, Kiyotaka whispered, the name filled with all the love he felt for his newborn son. Welcome to the world, little one. Suzune watched them, her heart overflowing with happiness. Kiyotaka looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He's perfect, Kiyotaka said again, his voice barely more than a whisper. Suzune nodded, her own tears spilling over. He is, she agreed, reaching out to gently touch Haruto's tiny hand. And he's ours. They stayed in the hospital for a few more days, making sure both Suzune and Haruto were healthy and well before they were discharged. When the time finally came to take Haruto home, both Kiyotaka and Suzune were filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had prepared as best as they could, but nothing could have fully prepared them for the reality of bringing their baby home. As they stepped through the front door of their house, Kiyotaka carrying Haruto carefully in his arms, a sense of peace settled over them. This was their home, and now it was their son's home too. That night, after they had fed and changed Haruto, they lay him down between them in their bed. Suzune watched as Haruto's tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, his little face peaceful in sleep. She felt Kiyotaka's hand slip into hers, and she looked up at him, her heart full. We're really parents now, Suzune whispered, almost in disbelief. Kiyotaka nodded, his eyes never leaving their son's face. We are, he agreed, his voice full of awe. And I couldn't be happier. Suzune smiled, feeling a deep contentment settle over her. She leaned over and kissed Haruto's forehead, then turned to Kiyotaka, her heart swelling with love for both of them. I love you, Kiyotaka, she whispered. Kiyotaka squeezed her hand gently, his eyes shining with emotion. I love you too, Suzune. More than anything. As they lay there, their son sleeping soundly between them, Suzune knew that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just two people who had fallen in love in the midst of life's challenges, they were a family now, bound together by love, by their past, and by the future they would build together. And as they drifted off to sleep, the warmth of their love surrounding them, Suzune knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, as a family. Chapter 5 Meeting the Family. 3 weeks had passed since Haruto's arrival, and life had settled into a new rhythm for Suzune and Kiyotaka. The sleepless nights and constant care that a newborn required were exhausting, but every time they looked at Haruto's tiny face, they were reminded of the profound joy that had entered their lives. The little boy had already brought so much happiness into their home, and now it was time for him to meet the rest of the family. Suzune's parents and her brother, Manabu, along with his wife Tachibana, were coming over to see Haruto for the first time. The day was filled with a quiet excitement, a sense of anticipation as Suzune and Kiyotaka prepared their home to welcome their guests. They wanted everything to be perfect for this special occasion. As the doorbell rang, Suzune felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. Kiyotaka was beside her, holding Haruto gently in his arms. The baby was dressed in a soft light blue onesie, and he was sleeping peacefully, his tiny fist curled up by his face. They're here, Suzune said softly, glancing up at Kiyotaka, who gave her a reassuring smile. Let's go greet them, he replied, his voice calm and steady. They walked to the door together, and as Suzune opened it, she was greeted by the familiar faces of her parents, Manabu and Tachibana. Her mother's eyes immediately went to the small bundle in Kiyotaka's arms, and her face lit up with a mixture of awe and joy. Suzune, Kiyotaka, her mother began, her voice trembling with emotion. He's beautiful. Suzune's father, usually composed and stoic, was visibly moved as well. He stepped forward, his eyes softening as he took in the sight of his grandson. May we see him? He asked, his voice gentle. Kiyotaka nodded and carefully handed Haruto to Suzune's mother, who accepted him with the utmost care. Haruto stirred slightly but remained asleep, his tiny lips parting in a small sigh. Suzune's mother gazed down at him, tears welling up in her eyes. He's perfect, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He looks so much like you, Suzune. Suzune smiled, feeling her heart swell with pride. He's a good mix of both of us, I think, she replied, glancing at Kiyotaka, who stood beside her, his eyes filled with the same pride and love. Manabu stepped forward next, his usually stern expression softened by the sight of his nephew. He was quiet for a moment, simply taking in the sight of the tiny boy in his mother's arms. Then, he looked up at Suzune and Kiyotaka, his eyes filled with something she rarely saw in him: vulnerability. He's incredible, Manabu said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. He reached out, gently touching Haruto's small hand, which instinctively curled around his finger. You've both done something amazing. Tachibana, standing beside Manabu, smiled warmly at Suzune and Kiyotaka. He's beautiful, she added softly. Congratulations, both of you. You must be so proud. We are, Kiyotaka replied, his voice full of quiet emotion. He's changed our lives in ways we couldn't have imagined." Suzune's mother, still holding Haruto, looked up at Suzune with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving us this gift, Suzune. He's everything we could have hoped for." Suzune felt her own tears welling up as she leaned in to hug her mother, careful not to jostle Haruto. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "For always being there for us." After a few more moments of quiet admiration, Suzune's mother handed Haruto back to Kiyotaka, who cradled him gently in his arms. "Would you all like to sit down?" Suzune offered, leading the way to the living room where they had prepared tea and snacks for their guests. As they settled in, the room was filled with a warm familial atmosphere. Haruto, now awake, looked around with wide curious eyes, his little hand gripping Kiyotaka's shirt. Suzune's parents and Manabu couldn't take their eyes off him, each of them marveling at the new addition to their family. After a while, Suzune's father cleared his throat, looking at Kiyotaka with a rare, warm smile. "Kiyotaka, may I hold my grandson?" "Of course," Kiyotaka replied, carefully handing Haruto over. As her father held Haruto, Suzune could see the same mixture of pride and joy that she felt every time she looked at her son. Her father, always so composed, now looked at Haruto with a softness that Suzune hadn't seen in a long time. "He's a strong little boy," her father said, his voice full of emotion. "You've done well, both of you." Suzune smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment as she watched her father bond with his grandson. Manabu and Tachibana sat close by, watching with smiles of their own, and Suzune's mother sat beside her, their hands intertwined. As the afternoon wore on, they all talked about the future, about the life Haruto would have, and the joy he had already brought into their lives. The room was filled with laughter and love, the kind of warmth that comes from being surrounded by family. At one point, Tachibana, who had been taking photos throughout the visit, suggested they take a family photo to commemorate the occasion. Everyone agreed, and they gathered in front of the large window that let in the afternoon light, a beautiful backdrop for the picture. Kiyotaka stood in the center, holding Haruto, who was now peacefully asleep again. Suzune stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm, while her parents stood on her other side. Manabu and Tachibana stood close by, smiling as they all came together for the photo. "Alright, everyone, smile," Tachibana said as she set the timer and hurried back to join the group. The camera clicked, capturing the moment, a perfect snapshot of their growing family. After the photo, they all sat down again, the conversation flowing easily. They talked about everything from Haruto's first few weeks to memories from Suzune and Manabu's childhood. Suzune felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her son was surrounded by so much love and support. As the evening approached, it was time for Suzune's family to leave. They said their goodbyes, each of them taking one last moment to hold Haruto and whisper words of love and encouragement. Suzune's mother, tears in her eyes, kissed Haruto's forehead gently. "Take care of him, Suzune," she said softly. "And take care of yourself, too." "I will, Mom," Suzune replied, hugging her mother tightly. "Thank you for everything." Manabu, who had been quieter than usual, gave Suzune a rare, heartfelt smile as he said goodbye. "You're doing a great job, Suzune," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Manabu," Suzune replied, touched by his words. "That means a lot to me." With one last wave, her family left, leaving Suzune and Kiyotaka standing in the doorway, watching as they drove away. Suzune felt a wave of emotion wash over her, happiness, gratitude, and a deep sense of love for the family they had created. As they walked back inside, Suzune leaned against Kiyotaka, her heart full. "That was perfect," she said softly, glancing up at him. Kiyotaka nodded, his eyes filled with the same contentment. "It was," he agreed. "Our family is really growing, isn't it?" Suzune smiled, looking down at Haruto, who was still sleeping peacefully in Kiyotaka's arms. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with love. "And I couldn't be happier." At night, after they had fed and changed Haruto, they lay him down in his crib beside their bed. Suzune and Kiyotaka climbed into bed, exhausted but happy, knowing that their son was safe and loved. As they drifted off to sleep, Suzune knew that this was only the beginning of their journey as parents. There would be challenges ahead, but with Kiyotaka by her side and the support of their family, she knew they could face anything. And as she closed her eyes, listening to the soft breathing of her son and the steady rhythm of Kiyotaka's heartbeat, Suzune felt a deep sense of peace. Their family was growing, their lives were full, and the future was bright with possibilities. Chapter 6: Meeting the Friends. It had been a month since Haruto's birth, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm for Suzune and Kiyotaka. They had learned to navigate the challenges of parenting, from sleepless nights to the seemingly endless cycle of feedings and diaper changes. But through it all, Haruto had brought so much joy into their lives, and now they were ready to share that joy with their closest friends from school. Suzune and Kiyotaka had decided to host a small gathering at their home, inviting their old friends to meet Haruto for the first time. The group had kept in touch over the years, their bond forged during those intense days at the Tokyo Metropolitan Advanced Nurturing School. Now, they were all leading different lives, but the connection they shared remained strong. As the day of the gathering arrived, Suzune found herself feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was eager for her friends to meet Haruto, but she also felt a pang of vulnerability. This was her son, the most precious person in her life, and she wanted everything to be perfect. Kiyotaka, sensing her anxiety, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be fine, Suzune," he said softly, his calm presence soothing her nerves. "They're going to love him." Suzune smiled, grateful for his support. "I know," she replied, glancing down at Haruto, who was lying in his bassinet, his tiny fists waving in the air. "I just want everything to go smoothly." "It will," Kiyotaka assured her, his voice steady. "They're our friends, and they're going to be just as happy as we are." Suzune nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right," she said, feeling her confidence return. "Let's do this." As the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of their first guests, Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged a quick encouraging glance before heading to the door. Kiyotaka gently picked up Haruto, cradling him in his arms as they went to greet their friends. The door swung open to reveal Kei Karuizawa, her smile bright and her eyes sparkling with excitement. Behind her stood Harada Imsuke, Kishida Kikyo and Ichinose Honami, all of them beaming with joy at the sight of their old friends and the new addition to their family. "Congratulations, you two," Kei exclaimed, stepping forward to give Suzune a quick hug before turning her attention to Haruto. "Oh my gosh, he's adorable." Kiyotaka smiled, holding Haruto a little closer so that everyone could see him. "This is Haruto," he said simply, his voice filled with pride. Kei leaned in, her eyes wide with awe as she looked at the tiny baby. "He's so small," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "And so cute. I can't believe you guys are parents now." Harada, always the gentle and kind-hearted one, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Suzune, Kiyotaka. He's beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. "You must be so proud." "We are," Suzune replied, her heart swelling with pride as she looked at Haruto. "He's changed our lives completely." Kishida, ever the bubbly and enthusiastic one, clapped her hands together, her excitement evident. "I'm so happy for you both. Haruto is going to be so loved," she said, her eyes shining. "Can I hold him?" Kiyotaka glanced at Suzune, who nodded with a smile. "Of course," Suzune said, watching as Kiyotaka carefully handed Haruto to Kishida. Kishida cradled Haruto gently, her expression softening as she looked down at the baby. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You've done an amazing job, Suzune." Suzune blushed slightly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at her friend's words. "Thank you, Kishida," she replied, her voice soft. "It means a lot to hear that." Ichinose, who had been quietly watching, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "He's so peaceful," she observed, her voice calm and soothing. "You two must be doing something right." Kiyotaka chuckled softly. "We're doing our best," he said, his tone humble. "But it's Haruto who's really teaching us." The group spent the next few minutes cooing over Haruto, each of them taking a turn to hold him and marvel at his tiny features. The room was filled with laughter and warmth, the bond between them all as strong as ever. As they settled into the living room, with Haruto now resting comfortably in his bassinet, the conversation flowed easily. They caught up on each other's lives, sharing stories of work, relationships, and the ups and downs of adulthood. It was a comforting reminder of the friendship they had built over the years, a connection that had endured despite the passage of time. At one point, Kei turned to Suzune with a mischievous grin. "So, Suzune," she began, her tone teasing, "how has Kiyotaka been as a dad? Any funny stories?" Suzune chuckled, glancing at Kiyotaka, who raised an eyebrow in mock suspicion. "Oh, he's been amazing," she said, her voice full of affection. But there was this one time Haruto had just fallen asleep and Kiyotaka was trying to be so careful not to wake him up. He was tiptoeing around the room, being all stealthy, and then he tripped over a toy and nearly fell flat on his face. The group burst into laughter, with Kiyotaka shaking his head in mock exasperation. "I maintain that the toy was strategically placed," he said, a playful glint in his eyes. "It was a trap." "It was hilarious," Suzune continued, giggling. "But Haruto didn't even wake up. He just slept through the whole thing." Kei laughed, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I wish I could have seen that," she said, grinning at Kiyotaka. "But seriously, you two seem like such great parents. Haruto is so lucky." Suzune felt a swell of pride at Kei's words, and she reached out to take Kiyotaka's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're just trying to do our best," she said, her voice soft. "But we're so happy. Haruto has brought so much joy into our lives." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of laughter, stories, and the warmth of friendship. Haruto, content and peaceful, was the center of attention, and Suzune couldn't have been happier to share this special time with the people who had been such an important part of their lives. As the day began to wind down and the sun started to set, the group gathered for one final moment together. Kei, always the one with the camera, suggested they take a photo to commemorate the day. "Let's get everyone in the picture," Kei said, setting the timer on her camera and hurrying to join the group. Kiyotaka once again held Haruto, who was now sleeping soundly, his tiny fist clutching the fabric of Kiyotaka's shirt. Suzune stood beside them, her heart full of love and gratitude as she looked at her friends, all gathered around them with smiles on their faces. The camera clicked, capturing the moment, a picture of friends, old and new, all connected by the love they shared for each other and the joy of welcoming Haruto into their lives. As their friends began to leave, each of them giving one last hug and offering words of love and support, Suzune felt a deep sense of contentment. This day had been everything she had hoped for, a celebration of love, friendship, and the new life that had brought them all together. After the last guest had left and the house was quiet once more, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat down together, Haruto still cradled in Kiyotaka's arms. The day had been long, but it had been perfect in every way. "I'm glad we did this," Suzune said softly, leaning her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. "It was so good to see everyone." Kiyotaka nodded, his eyes soft as he looked down at their son. "It was," he agreed. "Haruto is already so loved." Suzune smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "And he always will be," she whispered, her voice filled with certainty. As they sat together in the quiet of their home, with Haruto sleeping peacefully in their arms, Suzune knew that this was just the beginning of their journey as parents. There would be more challenges ahead, more joys, and more moments of love and connection. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. And she wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 7, First Crawl. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the living room as Suzune watched her son, Haruto, on the floor. At 7 months old, Haruto had grown into an energetic and curious baby, his bright eyes constantly exploring the world around him. Today was a special day, Suzune could feel it. Haruto had been getting closer and closer to crawling, and she had a feeling today might be the day. She looked over at Kiyotaka, who was sitting on the couch, a soft smile playing on his lips as he watched their son. "I think he's going to do it today," Suzune said, her voice filled with anticipation. Kiyotaka nodded, his eyes never leaving Haruto. "He's been trying for a while now," he replied. "Let's see who he decides to crawl to." Suzune smiled at the idea. "How about we make it a little game?" she suggested, a playful tone in her voice. "We'll both sit on either side of him and see who he crawls to first." Kiyotaka raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Are you ready to lose, Suzune?" he teased gently. Suzune chuckled, shaking her head. "We'll see about that," she said, moving to sit on the floor across from Kiyotaka, with Haruto in the middle. She settled into her spot and called out to her son, who was lying on his stomach, his chubby arms and legs kicking excitedly. "Come here, Haruto," Suzune cooed, her voice sweet and encouraging. "Come to mama." Haruto looked up at her, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. He shifted his weight slightly, his tiny hands pressing into the soft carpet as he tried to figure out what to do next. Kiyotaka leaned forward slightly, a warm smile on his face. "Come on, Haruto," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You can do it. Come to daddy." For a moment, Haruto seemed to be considering his options, his eyes flicking back and forth between his parents. Then, with a determined expression, he pushed up on his hands and knees, wobbling slightly as he tried to find his balance. Suzune held her breath, her heart pounding with excitement as she watched her son make his first real attempt at crawling. She could see the determination in his eyes, the little gears turning in his mind as he figured out how to move. With a small grunt of effort, Haruto lifted one hand and then the other, his tiny body moving forward in a clumsy, adorable shuffle. Suzune's heart swelled with pride as she watched him take those first unsteady steps on his hands and knees. "Come on, Haruto," she encouraged, her voice filled with love. "You're doing so well, sweetie." But despite her best efforts to coax him toward her, Haruto seemed to have made up his mind. He turned his attention to Kiyotaka, a wide toothless grin spreading across his face as he continued to crawl forward, his little body moving with more confidence with each step. Kiyotaka's eyes softened as he watched his son make his way toward him. "That's it, Haruto," he said, his voice full of pride. "You're almost there." With one final push, Haruto reached Kiyotaka's side, his tiny hands grasping at his father's leg as he pulled himself up into a sitting position. Kiyotaka scooped him up, lifting him into the air with a laugh. "You did it, Haruto," Kiyotaka exclaimed, his heart bursting with pride and joy as he held his son close. "You crawled all the way over here." Suzune couldn't help but laugh, her eyes shining with love as she watched the two of them together. "Well, I guess you won this round, Kiyotaka," she said, her voice light with amusement. But seeing Haruto crawl for the first time, that's the real win. Kiyotaka smiled at her, still holding Haruto in his arms. It's a win for all of us, he agreed, leaning over to give Suzune a gentle kiss on the forehead. He's growing up so fast. Suzune nodded, her heart full of happiness as she reached out to stroke Haruto's soft hair. He really is, she said softly. I'm so proud of him. As they sat together, basking in the joy of Haruto's milestone, Suzune had an idea. How about we surprise my parents and Manabu with the news? She suggested, her eyes bright with excitement. They'd love to see this. Kiyotaka smiled, nodding in agreement. That sounds like a great idea, he said. Let's invite them over. Later that afternoon, Suzune's parents, Manabu, and his wife, Tachibana, arrived at the house, all of them eager to see Haruto. Suzune and Kiyotaka had kept the news of Haruto's first crawl a secret, wanting to surprise them. As they all gathered in the living room, Suzune placed Haruto on the floor again, positioning him between herself and Kiyotaka. We have something special to show you, she said, a mischievous smile on her lips. Manabu raised an eyebrow, curious. What's going on? He asked, looking from Suzune to Kiyotaka. Just watch, Kiyotaka said, his tone full of excitement. Suzune leaned forward, calling out to Haruto. Come on, Haruto, she said, her voice gentle and encouraging. Show everyone what you can do. Haruto looked up at his mother, recognizing the familiar tone in her voice. He glanced around the room, his eyes taking in the sight of his grandparents and uncle watching him intently. With a determined expression, he once again pushed up on his hands and knees, ready to crawl. Manabu and Suzune's parents watched in awe as Haruto began to move, his tiny body inching forward with more confidence this time. Tachibana clasped her hands together, her eyes wide with amazement. He's crawling. Tachibana exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. Look at him go. Suzune's mother had tears in her eyes as she watched her grandson make his way toward Kiyotaka. Oh, Suzune, this is wonderful, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. He's growing up so fast. Suzune smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride and love as she watched Haruto reach Kiyotaka once again. Kiyotaka scooped him up, lifting him high into the air as Haruto giggled with delight. He's a natural, Manabu said, his voice filled with admiration. You two must be so proud. We are, Suzune replied, her heart full of joy. We wanted to share this special moment with all of you. Kiyotaka, still holding Haruto, walked over to Suzune's parents and handed Haruto to his grandmother. He wanted to show off for you, Kiyotaka said with a grin. Suzune's mother took Haruto into her arms, tears streaming down her face as she held him close. Thank you for sharing this with us, she said, her voice full of love. This means the world to us. The rest of the afternoon was spent in celebration, with Suzune's family marveling at Haruto's newfound skill. They took countless photos, capturing the joy and pride on everyone's faces as they watched Haruto crawl around the living room. As the sun began to set, Suzune and Kiyotaka stood in the doorway, waving goodbye to Suzune's parents, Manabu, and Tachibana as they left. The house was filled with the warmth of family and love, and Suzune felt a deep sense of contentment. As they closed the door, Kiyotaka turned to Suzune, a smile on his face. Today was a good day, he said, his voice full of happiness. Suzune nodded, reaching out to take his hand. It was perfect, she agreed, her heart full as she looked down at Haruto, who was now fast asleep in her arms. And I can't wait to see what comes next. Chapter 8 First Birthday. The house was alive with the sound of laughter and the smell of freshly baked cake. Suzune and Kiyotaka had spent the morning preparing for Haruto's first birthday party, a small but joyous gathering of close family and friends. The living room was decorated with colorful balloons and a banner that read, "Happy First Birthday, Haruto," in bright letters. Suzune stood in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on Haruto's birthday cake, a simple but beautiful vanilla cake with white frosting and a single candle. She smiled as she imagined Haruto's reaction to seeing it, his big eyes lighting up with excitement. In the living room, Kiyotaka was playing with Haruto, who was babbling happily as he crawled around on the floor. At 12 months old, Haruto had become a bundle of energy, always eager to explore and discover new things. Just that morning, Suzune and Kiyotaka had witnessed him standing up on his own, balancing with a new sense of confidence. Kiyotaka, do you think today might be the day? Suzune asked as she joined them in the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Kiyotaka looked up at her, a knowing smile on his face. I think it might be, he replied, watching Haruto with a mixture of pride and anticipation. He's been so close. As if on cue, Haruto pulled himself up using the edge of the coffee table, his tiny hands gripping the wood as he stood on wobbly legs. Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding with excitement. Come on, Haruto, Suzune encouraged gently, kneeling down a few feet away from him. You can do it, sweetie. Haruto looked at her, his eyes wide with determination. He hesitated for a moment, his legs trembling slightly as he balanced himself. Then, with a small grunt of effort, he lifted one foot and took a step forward. Kiyotaka and Suzune held their breath as they watched him take another step and then another. "He's walking," Kiyotaka whispered, his voice filled with awe. Suzune felt tears of joy welling up in her eyes as she watched her son take his first steps toward her. "That's it, Haruto," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're doing it." Haruto's face lit up with a big toothy grin as he realized what he was doing. He took a few more steps before wobbling and falling into Suzune's waiting arms. Suzune laughed, holding him close as tears streamed down her face. "I'm so proud of you, Haruto," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. Kiyotaka joined them, kneeling down beside Suzune and Haruto. "You're amazing, Haruto," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he ruffled his son's hair. "You just gave us the best birthday gift ever." Just then, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of their guests. Suzune wiped her tears and stood up, still holding Haruto in her arms. "Ready to surprise everyone?" she asked Kiyotaka with a smile. Kiyotaka nodded, standing up as well. "Let's do it." They opened the door to find Suzune's parents, Manabu, Tachibana, and a few close friends from their school days standing outside, all carrying gifts and wearing big smiles. "Happy birthday, Haruto." They all cheered in unison. Suzune and Kiyotaka welcomed them inside, where they exchanged hugs and greetings. The guests cooed over Haruto, who was still beaming from his big achievement earlier. After everyone had settled in and the presents were piled up on the coffee table, Suzune set Haruto down on the floor again, exchanging a conspiratorial glance with Kiyotaka. "We have something special to show you all," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The room fell silent as everyone watched Haruto, curious about what was about to happen. Suzune took a few steps back, crouching down a short distance away from Haruto. "Come here, Haruto," she called softly, holding out her arms. For a moment, Haruto looked around at the expectant faces surrounding him, his little mind processing the situation. Then, with a determined expression, he pushed himself up onto his feet. The room collectively held its breath as Haruto took one tentative step forward, then another and another. "He's walking." Tachibana exclaimed, clapping her hands together in delight. "Oh my goodness, look at him go." Suzune's parents gasped, their faces lighting up with pride and joy as they watched their grandson take his first steps. Manabu, usually so stoic, had a rare smile on his face, his eyes shining with emotion. Haruto continued to walk towards Suzune, his steps growing more confident with each passing moment. When he finally reached her, she scooped him up into her arms, laughing as she spun him around. "You did it, Haruto." She cheered, her heart overflowing with love and pride. Kiyotaka joined them, wrapping his arms around both Suzune and Haruto. "You're amazing, Haruto," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "We're so proud of you." The room erupted in applause and cheers, everyone beaming with happiness at Haruto's incredible milestone. It was a moment that none of them would ever forget, a perfect way to celebrate Haruto's first year of life. As the party continued, filled with laughter, cake, and presents, Suzune couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built with Kiyotaka and Haruto. This day, with their family and friends gathered around them, felt like the culmination of all the love and effort they had poured into their lives together. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet once more, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat on the couch, Haruto fast asleep in Kiyotaka's arms. They looked at each other, their hearts full. "The day was perfect," Suzune whispered, resting her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. Kiyotaka nodded, his gaze soft as he looked down at Haruto. "It really was," he agreed. "I can't believe how fast he's growing up." Suzune smiled, her heart swelling with love as she thought about all the milestones still to come. "I'm just so grateful that we get to share all of this together," she said softly, reaching out to gently touch Haruto's tiny hand. Kiyotaka leaned down to kiss Haruto's forehead, then looked at Suzune with a tender expression. "Me too," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I can't wait to see what the future holds for all of us." Chapter 9 First Words. 2 weeks had passed since Haruto's first birthday, and life in the Ayanokoji household had settled into a new rhythm. Haruto had become more confident in his walking, toddling around the house with boundless energy, exploring every nook and cranny. Suzune and Kiyotaka spent their days chasing after him, marveling at how quickly their son was growing up. One sunny afternoon, the family was gathered in the living room. Suzune was seated on the floor, building a tower of colorful blocks while Haruto sat beside her, clapping his hands in delight as she stacked the blocks higher and higher. Kiyotaka watched them from the couch, a content smile on his face as he sipped his tea. "You're going to knock it over again, aren't you?" Suzune teased Haruto with a playful smile, knowing full well that her son loved nothing more than to topple her carefully constructed towers. Haruto giggled, his bright eyes sparkling with mischief. He reached out his chubby hands, wobbling slightly as he stood up on his unsteady legs. Suzune held her breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when Haruto would send the blocks crashing down. But instead of knocking over the tower, Haruto did something completely unexpected. He looked up at Suzune, his expression suddenly serious, and then, in a small but clear voice, he said, "Mama." Time seemed to stop for a moment as Suzune's heart skipped a beat. She stared at Haruto in disbelief, her eyes wide with surprise. What did you just say?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe her ears. Haruto grinned, his face lighting up with pride as he repeated the word, more confidently this time. "Mama." Suzune's eyes filled with tears of joy as she reached out to scoop Haruto into her arms. "Oh, Haruto," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You said your first word. You said mama." Kiyotaka quickly set his tea down and joined them on the floor, his heart swelling with pride as he wrapped his arms around both Suzune and Haruto. "You're amazing, Haruto," he said softly, kissing the top of his son's head. "You're growing up so fast." Haruto looked up at Kiyotaka with wide eyes, as if considering something. Then, to both Suzune and Kiyotaka's astonishment, he pointed at Kiyotaka and said, "Dada." Suzune couldn't contain her laughter, her tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she hugged Haruto even tighter. "Kiyotaka, did you hear that?" she exclaimed, her voice full of happiness. "He called you Dada." Kiyotaka's expression softened, his usually composed demeanor melting into one of pure love and pride. "I heard," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He gently took Haruto from Suzune's arms, cradling him close. "You're incredible, Haruto. We're so proud of you." Haruto beamed at his parents, clearly pleased with their reactions. He babbled happily, repeating mama and Dada over and over again, as if testing out his new vocabulary. Suzune and Kiyotaka couldn't stop smiling, their hearts overflowing with love for their little boy. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm golden light, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat together on the floor, holding Haruto between them. They spent the rest of the day encouraging Haruto to speak, laughing with delight each time he successfully pronounced another word. It was a day filled with joy, a day they knew they would treasure forever. That evening, after Haruto had fallen asleep, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat together on the couch, reflecting on the incredible milestones their son had reached in such a short time. "Can you believe it?" Suzune murmured, resting her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. "He's already walking and talking. It feels like just yesterday he was born." Kiyotaka nodded, his gaze soft as he thought about the journey they had been on since Haruto's birth. "It's amazing how fast time flies," he agreed. "But I'm so grateful we get to experience all of this together." Suzune smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Me too," she said softly. "And I can't wait to see what other surprises Haruto has in store for us." Kiyotaka gently kissed the top of Suzune's head, wrapping his arm around her as they sat in peaceful silence, savoring the quiet moments they shared as a family. They knew that the future would bring more challenges and joys, but for now, they were content to simply be together, cherishing each new milestone as it came. In the dim light of the living room, with their son peacefully asleep in the next room, Suzune and Kiyotaka closed their eyes, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. Life, with all its ups and downs, was beautiful and they wouldn't trade it for anything. Chapter 10. Reunion at Advanced Nurturing High School. The campus of Advanced Nurturing High School looked just as Suzune and Kiyotaka remembered it, though it felt strange to walk its familiar halls again, this time hand in hand with their 5-year-old son, Haruto. The sun was shining brightly on the day of their class reunion, and the air was filled with a buzz of excitement and nostalgia. Haruto, with his father's calm demeanor and his mother's sharp eyes, was curiously taking in the surroundings, his little hand clutching Kiyotaka's as they made their way toward the reunion hall. Suzune couldn't help but smile as she watched her son, amazed at how much he had grown and how much he resembled both her and Kiyotaka. "Is this where you and Daddy went to school?" Haruto asked, looking up at Suzune with wide eyes. "Yes, it is," Suzune replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. "This is where we met and where we made a lot of memories." Kiyotaka glanced down at Haruto, his expression soft. "We thought it would be nice for you to see where it all started," he said, a hint of warmth in his usually composed voice. As they approached the reunion hall, they saw a group of familiar faces waiting for them, former classmates who had been an important part of their high school years. Suzune spotted Kei, who was waving at them enthusiastically, and beside her was Hirata, who smiled warmly as they approached. "Kiyotaka." "Suzune." Kei called out as she ran up to them. "It's been so long. And is this your son? He's adorable." Suzune smiled as Kei crouched down to Haruto's level, giving him a friendly wave. "Hi there, little guy. I'm Kei, a friend of your mom and dad's." Haruto gave Kei a shy smile, hiding slightly behind Kiyotaka's leg. "Hi," he said softly, peeking out at her. Kei laughed, standing up again and giving Kiyotaka and Suzune a hug. "He's so cute. I can't believe you two are parents now." "It's still hard for us to believe sometimes," Kiyotaka replied with a small smile, placing a hand on Haruto's head. As they made their way inside, more familiar faces greeted them. Sudo, now a professional basketball player, was chatting with Kishida, who had become a successful influencer. Everyone seemed to be doing well, and the atmosphere was filled with camaraderie and laughter. But it wasn't long before they encountered someone they hadn't seen in years. Ryuin. He was leaning casually against a wall, his arms crossed, watching the crowd with his usual sharp gaze. When he saw Kiyotaka and Suzune approaching, his eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. Well, if it isn't Ayanokoji, Ryuin drawled, pushing off the wall and walking over to them. His gaze flickered to Haruto, who was curiously staring up at the tall man. And who's this? Your kid? Suzune tensed slightly, but Kiyotaka remained calm, his expression unreadable. This is our son, Haruto, he said simply, his tone neutral. Ryuin crouched down to get a closer look at Haruto, who stared back at him with wide, unblinking eyes. After a moment, Ryuin smirked, his gaze shifting back to Kiyotaka. He looks just like you, he remarked, standing up again. I bet he's got your brains too. Haruto continued to stare at Ryuin, his little brow furrowing, as he tried to make sense of the man's words. After a moment, Ryuin chuckled and ruffled Haruto's hair. I think I'll call you Mini Monster, he said, clearly referencing Kiyotaka's own moniker from their high school days. Suzune couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the nickname, while Kiyotaka simply looked at Ryuin with an amused expression. That's an interesting choice of words, Kiyotaka said calmly, his voice carrying a subtle hint of humor. Ryuin shrugged, a smirk still playing on his lips. Well, if he's anything like you, the name'll fit, he replied, his tone teasing but not unfriendly. Besides, I owe him that much for how you beat me back then. Suzune relaxed slightly, realizing that Ryuin's attitude was less hostile than she had anticipated. It seemed that the years had mellowed him somewhat, though his sharp tongue was still intact. As they continued to mingle with their former classmates, Haruto slowly came out of his shell, warming up to the new faces around him. He was especially fascinated by Sudo, who towered over him and regaled him with stories of his basketball career. Haruto listened intently, his eyes wide with admiration. Maybe you'll be a basketball player one day too, Sudo said with a grin, patting Haruto on the back. You've got the genes for it, that's for sure. Haruto giggled, looking up at his father. Maybe I will, Daddy, he said, his voice full of excitement. Kiyotaka smiled, a rare sight that Suzune cherished. We'll see, Haruto, he replied, his tone gentle. You can be anything you want to be. As the reunion continued, they finally encountered their old homeroom teacher, Chabashira-sensei. She seemed a bit surprised to see them, but her expression softened when she noticed Haruto standing between them. Is this your child? She asked, her usual stern tone replaced with a touch of curiosity. Yes, this is Haruto, Suzune replied, smiling as she introduced their son. Tabashira crouched down to Haruto's level, studying him closely. You're lucky, Haruto, she said after a moment, her voice oddly gentle. Your parents are remarkable people. Haruto blinked up at her, not fully understanding the weight of her words, but he smiled politely nonetheless. Thank you, he said, his voice soft. Tabashira straightened up, her gaze shifting to Kiyotaka and Suzune. You've both come a long way since your days here, she remarked. It's good to see you doing well. Thank you, Chabashira-sensei, Kiyotaka replied, his tone respectful. As the evening drew to a close, the reunion began to wind down, and the attendees started saying their goodbyes. Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged contact information with their old classmates, promising to stay in touch. Haruto, now more comfortable with everyone, waved goodbye to his new friends, his face beaming with happiness. As they left the school grounds and made their way back home, Haruto held onto both of his parents' hands, chattering excitedly about all the people he had met and the stories he had heard. That was fun, Mama, Daddy, Haruto said as they reached the car. I liked meeting your friends. Suzune smiled, squeezing his hand gently. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Haruto, she said softly. It was nice to share our memories with you. Kiyotaka nodded in agreement, lifting Haruto into his car seat. We're proud of you, Haruto, he said as he buckled him in. You handled everything so well today. Haruto grinned up at his father, clearly pleased with the praise. I had a good time, he said, his voice full of contentment. As they drove home, Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged a glance, their hearts full. The reunion had been a reminder of how far they had come since their high school days and how much they had built together. With Haruto by their side, they knew that their journey was only just beginning and they couldn't wait to see what the future held for their family. Chapter 11 Fist Report Card. The Ayanokoji household buzzed with a quiet excitement on a crisp autumn afternoon. Haruto had just returned from his first grade class at the most prestigious primary school in Japan, his school bag slightly heavier than usual with the weight of his first report card. Suzune and Kiyotaka had been eagerly anticipating this moment, knowing full well that it was only the beginning of their son's academic journey. Suzune's parents, Manabu, and his wife, Tachibana, had gathered at their home for the occasion. The living room was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of freshly brewed tea and the soft hum of conversation. Haruto, still in his school uniform, sat at the center of attention, his eyes bright with excitement as he fidgeted with the envelope in his hands. "You've been working very hard, Haruto," Suzune said gently, sitting beside him and smoothing his hair. "Are you ready to see how you did?" Haruto nodded eagerly, his small hands carefully opening the envelope. Kiyotaka watched with his usual calm demeanor, though a hint of pride shone in his eyes as he observed his son's enthusiasm. As Haruto pulled out the report card and handed it to his mother, Suzune's father leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Let's see how our little genius did," he said with a smile, his tone affectionate. Suzune unfolded the report card and began to read through it, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the results. "Perfect 100s, she murmured in disbelief, glancing at Kiyotaka, who simply nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. Manabu, who had been quietly observing from the side, raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Every subject?" he asked, moving closer to take a look. Suzune handed the report card to Manabu, her voice filled with pride. "Every subject," she confirmed, her heart swelling with joy. Manabu took the report card, scanning the marks carefully. As his eyes passed over each score, a rare smile spread across his usually serious face. "This is impressive, Haruto," he said, his voice laced with admiration. "You've done exceptionally well." Haruto beamed, clearly pleased with the praise from his uncle. "I worked really hard, Uncle Manabu," he said proudly. "Just like Mama and Daddy told me to." Tachibana, who had been sitting beside Manabu, looked over his shoulder at the report card, her eyes widening as well. "Perfect scores at such a young age," she marveled. "You must be very proud, Suzune." Suzune smiled warmly, her gaze shifting to Kiyotaka, who had remained silent but was watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. "We are," she replied softly. "But more importantly, we're proud of how dedicated he is to learning." Kiyotaka finally spoke, his voice steady and full of pride. "Haruto has always been curious and determined," he said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "These results reflect his hard work, but they're also just the beginning. There's so much more for him to learn and explore." Haruto looked up at his father, his eyes shining with admiration. "I want to be like you, Daddy," he said earnestly. "I want to learn everything." Kiyotaka's expression softened, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're already well on your way, Haruto," he replied gently. "But remember, it's not just about the scores. It's about understanding, growing, and finding your own path." Suzune's mother, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke up, her voice filled with pride and emotion. "Haruto, you've made us all so proud," she said, reaching out to take his small hand in hers. "You're a very special boy, just like your parents." Haruto blushed at the attention, but his smile remained bright as he looked around at his family. "Thank you, Grandma," he said shyly. The family continued to discuss Haruto's achievements, the atmosphere filled with warmth and pride. Suzune's father, who had always been a man of few words, was visibly moved by his grandson's success, his usual stoic expression softened by a grandfatherly pride. As the afternoon wore on, they celebrated Haruto's accomplishments with a special dinner, Suzune's parents and Manabu toasting to their grandson's bright future. The conversation flowed easily, filled with stories of Haruto's experiences at school and the family's hopes for his continued growth. Later that evening, after their guests had left and Haruto had been tucked into bed, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat together in the quiet of their living room, reflecting on the day's events. "He really is remarkable," Suzune said softly, her voice filled with love and pride. "I can't believe how much he's grown and learned in such a short time." Kiyotaka nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's determined, just like you," he replied, his voice tinged with warmth. "But more than that, he's curious and eager to explore the world. That's something we should continue to nurture." Suzune leaned her head against Kiyotaka's shoulder, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "We'll do everything we can to support him," she said softly. "I'm so grateful we can guide him on this journey together." Kiyotaka wrapped his arm around Suzune, pulling her closer. "I am too," he murmured, his voice full of emotion. "Haruto's future is bright and I'm excited to see where it takes him." As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, the warmth of their love for each other and their son filled the room. They knew that, with Haruto's determination and their unwavering support, there was nothing he couldn't achieve. Chapter 12: A Shadow from the Past. The crisp afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Ayanokoji household as Suzune and Kiyotaka prepared tea in the kitchen, chatting about their day. Haruto, now 6 years old, was sitting in the living room, engrossed in a book about space exploration. His curious mind had been filled with wonder about the stars and the vastness of the universe ever since he had learned about them in school. The peaceful atmosphere was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Kiyotaka glanced at Suzune, his usually calm expression darkening slightly as an unsettling feeling washed over him. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not today. Suzune seemed to sense the shift in his mood, her eyes narrowing slightly as she handed him the teapot. "I'll get it," Kiyotaka said quietly, setting the teapot down and making his way to the door. When he opened it, he was met with a sight he hadn't anticipated. His father, Professor Ayanokoji, the man who had shaped and controlled so much of his early life, stood on the doorstep, his cold, calculating eyes taking in every detail of the house before settling on Kiyotaka. "Kiyotaka," his father greeted, his voice as composed and detached as ever. "May I come in?" Kiyotaka's body tensed, but he stepped aside, allowing his father to enter. Suzune, having heard the voice, appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. She had never met Kiyotaka's father in person, but she knew enough about him to feel a deep unease in his presence. "Kiyotaka's father," she said politely, though her tone was wary. "What brings you here?" "I'm on parole," Professor Ayanokoji replied, his gaze shifting to Suzune briefly before moving past her to the living room, where Haruto sat. "I thought it was time I met my grandson." Suzune's heart skipped a beat and she instinctively stepped closer to Kiyotaka. He gently placed a reassuring hand on her back, but his gaze remained fixed on his father, his expression unreadable. Haruto, noticing the visitor, looked up from his book. His bright eyes, so full of curiosity, widened as he saw the unfamiliar man enter the room. "Who's that, Daddy?" Haruto asked, closing his book and standing up, his small form looking even smaller in the presence of the imposing figure before him. Kiyotaka hesitated for a moment before speaking. "This is my father, Haruto. Your grandfather." Haruto's eyes lit up with curiosity as he approached his grandfather, unaware of the tension in the room. "Hello, Grandpa," he said politely, his voice tinged with excitement. "I didn't know I had a grandfather." Professor Ayanokoji studied his grandson for a moment, his gaze sharp and calculating. He slowly bent down to Haruto's level, his expression unreadable. "You're a fine boy," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "A masterpiece, even." Haruto blinked, not entirely understanding the weight of his grandfather's words, but he smiled nonetheless, pleased with the compliment. "Thank you, Grandpa." Professor Ayanokoji stood up, his gaze shifting back to Kiyotaka and Suzune. "He's more of a masterpiece than you ever were, Kiyotaka," he remarked, his tone cold and clinical. "I wonder just how great he would have been if he had been raised in the White Room." The mention of the White Room sent a chill through the room. Suzune stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she took a step closer to Kiyotaka, who remained outwardly calm but was clearly tense. Haruto, however, was puzzled. "What's the White Room, Daddy?" he asked, his innocent eyes looking up at Kiyotaka. Kiyotaka sighed softly, crouching down to Haruto's level, his expression softening as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The White Room was a place where children were trained in a very harsh and cold way," he explained gently. "It wasn't a place for children to grow up happy or healthy. It's not something you need to worry about, Haruto." Haruto nodded slowly, his curiosity tempered by the serious tone in his father's voice. "Okay, Daddy," he said, though a small frown creased his forehead as he glanced back at his grandfather. Professor Ayanokoji, seemingly disinterested in the emotional undercurrents of the conversation, took a step closer to Haruto. He placed a hand on the boy's head, a gesture that seemed more like an inspection than an act of affection. "Remember this, Haruto," he said, his voice low and chilling. "People are just tools. Use them to make yourself greater and more powerful. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." Kiyotaka's eyes darkened at his father's words, and Suzune's hand instinctively clenched at her side. Haruto looked confused, not entirely grasping the meaning behind the words, but sensing that something was wrong. "Father, that's enough," Kiyotaka said, his voice firm, stepping between his son and his father. "Haruto is not a tool. He's a child who deserves to grow up with love and care, not under the shadow of manipulation." Professor Ayanokoji regarded Kiyotaka with an unreadable expression before finally stepping back. "I suppose our philosophies will always differ," he said coolly. "But remember, Kiyotaka, the world is not kind. Power is the only thing that matters." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his presence still casting a long cold shadow over the room. As he reached the door, he glanced back at Haruto one last time, his eyes narrowing. "Goodbye, Haruto. Perhaps one day you'll understand what it truly means to be powerful," he said before stepping outside and closing the door behind him. The tension in the room lingered even after Professor Ayanokoji's departure. Suzune immediately knelt beside Haruto, her hands gently cupping his face as she looked into his eyes. "Are you okay, sweetie?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Haruto nodded, though he still looked troubled. "Why did Grandpa say those things, Mama?" he asked quietly. "Why did he say people are just tools?" Suzune glanced at Kiyotaka, who sighed and knelt beside them, placing a reassuring hand on Haruto's shoulder. Grandpa has a very different view of the world, Haruto Kiyotaka explained gently. But it's not the right view. People aren't tools to be used, they're friends, family, people who care about each other. And that's what's most important. Haruto seemed to ponder his father's words for a moment before nodding slowly. Okay, Daddy, he said softly, leaning into Kiyotaka's comforting embrace. I won't listen to Grandpa. I'll be like you and Mama instead. Kiyotaka smiled softly, his heart swelling with pride as he hugged his son. That's all we want, Haruto, he said quietly. Just be yourself and remember that we love you, no matter what. Suzune wrapped her arms around both of them, her heart aching with love and relief. Together, they stayed like that for a while, finding solace in each other's presence, knowing that, no matter what shadows from the past may come, their bond as a family would remain strong and unbreakable. Chapter 13 Haruto's Triumph. The Ayanokoji household buzzed with anticipation. Haruto had just finished his first year at the most prestigious middle school in Japan, and today, they would receive his report card. It was a ritual that had become an essential part of their lives, gathering as a family to review and celebrate Haruto's achievements. Kiyotaka and Suzune sat in the living room, exchanging glances as they waited. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, a comforting warmth that reflected the pride they felt for their son. Haruto had grown into an intelligent, determined, and kind young man, and they couldn't be prouder. Finally, Haruto walked in, holding the envelope containing his report card. At 12 years old, he had already made a name for himself at school, not just as a top student but as the student council president, a position that carried significant weight at such a prestigious institution. Are you ready? Suzune asked, her voice filled with warmth as she smiled at her son. Haruto nodded, his own excitement tempered by the calm confidence he had inherited from his parents. I think so, he replied, carefully opening the envelope and pulling out the report card. Kiyotaka leaned forward, his expression as composed as ever, but Suzune could see the pride shining in his eyes. Haruto handed the report card to his mother, who unfolded it with a mix of anticipation and affection. Suzune's eyes scanned the report card, and as she read each line, her smile grew wider. Haruto, she began, her voice brimming with pride, you've done it again. Perfect scores in every subject. Haruto beamed, his face lighting up with happiness. I worked really hard this year, he said, glancing at his father for approval. Kiyotaka nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. You've done exceptionally well, Haruto, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Not just in your studies, but in leading the student council as well. That's no small feat. Haruto's cheeks flushed with pride, but he remained humble. I learned a lot from watching you and Mom, he admitted. You both taught me to stay focused and work hard, but also to care about the people around me. Suzune's heart swelled with love and pride as she reached out to touch Haruto's hand. You've become an incredible young man, Haruto, she said softly. We're so proud of you, not just for your achievements, but for the kind and responsible person you've grown into. Haruto smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment as he looked at his parents. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you. Kiyotaka leaned back, a contemplative look on his face. You've accomplished a lot this year, Haruto, but remember that this is just the beginning, he said thoughtfully. There will be more challenges ahead, and each one will teach you something new. Haruto nodded, understanding the wisdom in his father's words. I know, Dad. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Just then, Suzune's parents and her brother Manabu, along with his wife Tachibana, arrived. They had come to join in the celebration, having been eager to hear about Haruto's progress. Manabu greeted his nephew with a rare smile, his usual stern expression softening. Let's see how the student council president did, he said, taking the report card from Suzune and scanning it. His eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. Perfect scores in everything. You've really outdone yourself, Haruto. Tachibana leaned over to peek at the report card, her eyes widening with admiration. It's amazing, Haruto. You're truly gifted, she said, her voice filled with warmth. Haruto, feeling a bit embarrassed by all the attention, smiled modestly. I just worked hard, that's all, he said quietly. Suzune's father, who had been observing quietly, spoke up with a proud tone. Hard work and determination are important, but it's clear that you have a natural talent, Haruto. You're following in your father's footsteps and perhaps even surpassing them. Kiyotaka, hearing this, remained silent but placed a hand on Haruto's shoulder, a silent gesture of support and encouragement. Suzune noticed the subtle exchange and smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The family gathered around the table to celebrate, the atmosphere filled with joy and pride. They shared stories, laughed, and discussed Haruto's future, all while enjoying a special dinner prepared by Suzune and Tachibana. As the evening wore on, Haruto excused himself to check on some student council matters, leaving the adults to talk. Manabu turned to Kiyotaka, his tone serious but respectful. Kiyotaka, Haruto's achievements are impressive, he said. He's clearly inherited not just your intellect but your sense of responsibility. It's rare to see such maturity in someone so young." Kiyotaka nodded, acknowledging his brother-in-law's words. Haruto has always been focused and determined. But he's also learned to balance that with empathy, something I'm grateful for. Suzune, listening to the conversation, felt a deep sense of pride in both her husband and her son. "Haruto has a good heart," she added softly. "He's determined to make a difference and we'll support him every step of the way." Later that night, after their guests had left, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat together in the quiet of their home, reflecting on the day's events. Haruto had already gone to bed, exhausted but happy after the long day of celebration. "You know, Suzune," Kiyotaka began, his voice thoughtful, "seeing Haruto grow and achieve so much reminds me of the path we've walked together. But it also shows me how much further he can go." Suzune nodded, leaning her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. "He's capable of so much, Kiyotaka," she murmured. "And he has your strength and wisdom to guide him. I'm so grateful for the family we've built." Kiyotaka wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "As am I, Suzune. Haruto has a bright future ahead of him, and with us by his side, he'll be ready for whatever challenges come his way." As they sat together in the peaceful silence, their hearts filled with love and pride for their son, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together stronger and more united than ever. Chapter 14 New Start at Anne's. The air was crisp and filled with the sounds of anticipation as Kiyotaka and Suzune stood at the entrance of Advanced Nurturing High School. The familiar towering gate stood before them, a gateway to memories of their own teenage years. Today, however, they weren't here as students, but as parents. Their son, Haruto, was about to embark on his own journey at the school that had shaped their lives. Haruto, now 15, stood beside them with a calm confidence that belied his age. He was the spitting image of Kiyotaka, with his sharp features, piercing eyes, and an air of quiet determination. Dressed in the school's immaculate uniform, he looked every bit the part of a student destined for greatness. Kiyotaka and Suzune exchanged a glance, their unspoken thoughts mirrored in each other's eyes. This was a significant moment not just for Haruto, but for them as well. They knew all too well the challenges and trials that awaited him within these walls, but they also knew that he was more than capable of handling whatever came his way. Suzune smiled softly at her son, her voice filled with warmth. "Haruto, this is where your journey begins. You've already accomplished so much, but the next few years will be a true test of your abilities and character." Haruto nodded, his expression serious but excited. "I'm ready, Mom. I'll do my best, just like you and Dad did." Kiyotaka placed a hand on Haruto's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "Remember, Haruto, this school will challenge you in ways you've never imagined. But you've been prepared for this. Trust in yourself and stay focused on your goals." As they spoke, the school's main building loomed ahead, and a wave of nostalgia washed over Kiyotaka and Suzune. The memories of their own time at this school were still fresh in their minds, memories of trials, rivalries, and ultimately, the bond that had brought them together. Before they could say anything more, a familiar voice called out to them. "Ayanokoji, Horikita. It's been a while." Kiyotaka and Suzune turned to see Sabashira, their old homeroom teacher, walking toward them. Her once jet black hair was now streaked with gray, and the lines on her face had deepened, but her presence was as commanding as ever. Beside her was Hoshinomiya, whose cheerful demeanor hadn't changed a bit, though her age was more apparent now in her slightly slower steps and the gentle creases around her eyes. "Tabashira-sensei, Hoshinomiya-sensei," Suzune greeted them with a polite nod, her voice laced with the respect she still held for her former teachers. Tabashira smiled, a rare sight back when she was their teacher. "It's good to see you both again," she said, her eyes flicking to Haruto. "And this must be your son, Haruto." Haruto bowed respectfully. "It's an honor to meet you, Tabashira-sensei." Tabashira looked Haruto over with a critical eye, nodding in approval. "I'm glad to see you're in my class, Haruto. From what I've heard, you're as exceptional as your parents were, if not more." Before Haruto could respond, Hoshinomiya leaned in, her eyes sparkling mischievously. "And just as handsome as his father too," she teased, winking at Kiyotaka. She turned her attention fully to Haruto, clearly delighted. "You know, Haruto-kun, if you ever feel like switching to a more fun class, my door is always open." Suzune sighed, recognizing the playful nature of her former teacher. "Hoshinomiya-sensei, I think you'll do just fine in Tabashira-sensei's class." Hoshinomiya pouted slightly, pretending to be hurt. "Oh, but Horikita-chan, wouldn't you want your son to have a more relaxed and enjoyable experience? We could have so much fun." Before anyone could react, Tabashira rolled her eyes and whacked Hoshinomiya over the head with a clipboard she had been holding. "Stop trying to steal my students," she said dryly, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Haruto couldn't help but chuckle at the interaction. "Thank you for the offer, Hoshinomiya-sensei, but I think I'll stay in Class A," he said politely, glancing at his parents who were both trying not to laugh. Kiyotaka gave his son a small nod of approval. "Good choice," he said, his tone just as calm as always. Hoshinomiya rubbed the top of her head, still grinning despite the light reprimand. "Ah, well, can't blame a teacher for trying. But seriously, Haruto-kun, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." As the morning sun continued to rise, casting a warm glow over the school, Haruto knew it was time. He turned to his parents, feeling a mix of excitement and a little bit of nerves. This would be the first time he was truly on his own, and while he knew he would miss his parents, he was eager to begin this new chapter of his life. "We'll see you in 3 years," Suzune said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. She reached out to smooth his hair, a small gesture that conveyed a world of love. Kiyotaka simply placed a hand on Haruto's shoulder again, their bond unspoken but deeply understood. "You'll do great," was all he said, but it was enough. Haruto took a deep breath, looking up at the towering building that would be his home for the next 3 years. "Thank you, Mom, Dad," he said quietly. "I'll make you proud." With a final wave, Haruto turned and walked toward the main entrance, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he disappeared into the building, Suzune felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of pride, nostalgia, and a hint of sadness. Tabashiro watched him go, a rare softness in her eyes. "He'll be just fine," she said, almost to herself. "He's got good blood." Kiyotaka and Suzune stayed a moment longer, watching the school that had once been their entire world. Then, with a final nod to their former teachers, they turned and walked away, knowing that Haruto's journey had just begun. CHAPTER 15, Next Gen. 3 years had passed in the blink of an eye. The air was crisp, the sun shining brightly on the day of graduation at Advanced Nurturing High School. Haruto Ayanokoji stood at the top of the steps, dressed in his graduation robes, as he overlooked the campus that had been his home for the past 3 years. It was a place where he had thrived, just like his parents had before him. As the top student in his class and the student council president, Haruto had led with the same quiet confidence that defined his father. Beside him stood his girlfriend, Mei Fujimura, the vice president of the student council and the second top student in the school. Mei was a brilliant strategist, known for her sharp intellect and strong will, traits that had drawn her to Haruto. With her long, raven black hair and piercing green eyes, she was as beautiful as she was intelligent. The graduation ceremony had been a formal affair, with Haruto delivering the valedictory address. As the students filed out, families gathered to congratulate their children. Haruto spotted his parents standing together, looking as calm and composed as ever. Suzune and Kiyotaka had always been a pillar of strength for him, and today was no different. Haruto walked toward them, his heart swelling with pride and a touch of nostalgia. "Mom, Dad," he said, bowing slightly out of respect. Suzune smiled warmly at her son, her eyes filled with love and pride. "Haruto, you've done exceptionally well. We're so proud of you." Kiyotaka nodded, his expression as serene as always, but Haruto could see the pride in his father's eyes. "You've exceeded our expectations, Haruto. You've earned everything you've achieved." Haruto felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His parents had always been supportive, but knowing that he had lived up to their legacy meant everything to him. He glanced over at Mei, who was standing nearby, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "This is Mei Fujimura," Haruto introduced her, his voice filled with affection. "My girlfriend and the vice president of the student council." Mei stepped forward, bowing respectfully to Suzune and Kiyotaka. "It's an honor to meet you both. Haruto has spoken so highly of you." Suzune's smile widened as she took Mei's hand in hers. "The honor is ours, Mei. Haruto has told us a lot about you as well. You must be an extraordinary young woman to have caught his attention." Mei blushed slightly at the compliment but smiled back. "Thank you, Horikita-san." Haruto's parents were thrilled with Mei, but he could tell that the real test would come later that evening. Suzune had invited Mei and her parents over for dinner at their home. It was an opportunity for their families to meet and for Haruto to introduce his girlfriend formally. That evening, the Ayanokoji residence was filled with a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Suzune had gone all out to prepare a sumptuous dinner, while Kiyotaka helped set the table, his calm demeanor making the preparation smooth and efficient. Haruto was nervous, not because of the dinner, but because he knew how protective Mei's parents could be. When the doorbell rang, Haruto's heart skipped a beat. He quickly went to greet Mei and her parents, who were dressed elegantly, but with an air of formality that hinted at their initial skepticism. "Welcome, Fujimura-san, Fujimura-sama," Haruto greeted them with a deep bow, inviting them inside. Mei's father, Hiroshi Fujimura, was a tall man with a stern expression, while her mother, Yuko Fujimura, was more reserved but no less discerning. They both eyed Haruto with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Suzune and Kiyotaka joined Haruto at the door, offering warm smiles and greetings. "Welcome to our home," Suzune said, her tone gracious. "We're so glad you could join us for dinner." As the families settled around the dinner table, the initial conversation was polite, with Hiroshi and Yuko asking Haruto about his future plans. Haruto answered confidently, outlining his goals with the same determination he had always shown. It wasn't long before the conversation turned to more personal topics. Hiroshi began, his tone serious, we've heard a lot about your accomplishments, but as parents, we can't help but worry. What makes you believe you can provide a stable and secure future for our daughter? Before Haruto could respond, Kiyotaka spoke up, his voice calm but commanding. Fujimura-san, I understand your concerns. As parents, we all want the best for our children. That's why Suzune and I have made sure that Haruto is well prepared for whatever the future holds. Kiyotaka then revealed a piece of information that shocked everyone at the table except Suzune. Haruto, we've decided to give you a house and a sum of 1 billion yen to start your life. It's not just a gift. It's a responsibility. We trust you to use it wisely. Haruto's eyes widened in surprise, and Mei gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Hiroshi and Yuko exchanged stunned glances, clearly taken aback by the revelation. Mom, Haruto began, struggling to find the right words. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem enough. Suzune smiled gently at her son. We believe in you, Haruto. We know you'll make the right choices. Mei's parents, who had been skeptical at first, now seemed to relax, their concerns eased by Kiyotaka's words and the obvious support Haruto had from his parents. Hiroshi cleared his throat, his tone much softer now. It seems we may have underestimated you, Haruto. You have our blessing. Yuko nodded in agreement, a small smile playing on her lips. We're happy to know Mei is in good hands. The rest of the evening was filled with laughter, conversation, and a growing sense of camaraderie between the two families. By the end of the night, it was clear that any doubts Mei's parents had were put to rest. As they bid farewell to their guests, Haruto turned to his parents, his heart full of gratitude and love. Thank you for everything, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Kiyotaka placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes softening. You've made us proud, Haruto. Remember, no matter where life takes you, we'll always be here for you. Suzune hugged her son tightly, feeling a deep sense of contentment. You're going to do amazing things, Haruto. We love you. As the night came to a close, Haruto felt a sense of peace and determination. With his parents' unwavering support, his future seemed bright and full of promise. And as he stood at the threshold of this new chapter in his life, he knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, just like his parents had done before him. Chapter 16 Father's Final Days. The day was warm, a gentle breeze drifting through the streets as the sun hung high in the sky. The Ayanokoji household had settled into a rhythm of peace and prosperity over the years. Haruto, now 18, had grown into a confident, capable young man, guided by the values his parents instilled in him. Kiyotaka and Suzune, having retired early and relishing their quiet life together, felt as though the difficulties of the past had faded away into distant memories. That all changed when an unexpected visitor appeared at their doorstep one late afternoon. Kiyotaka had been reading in the living room while Suzune prepared tea in the kitchen. Haruto was out with his girlfriend, Mei, who was fast becoming a beloved member of their family. Life seemed perfect until the doorbell rang. Kiyotaka opened the door and was met with a sight he hadn't anticipated. His father. But he wasn't the cold, calculating man from his past. He was much older now, his face etched with deep lines, his posture frail and bent with age. His once intimidating presence was diminished by his weakening frame, and he carried a cane to steady himself. Kiyotaka, the old man greeted, his voice rougher, but still unmistakable. It's been a long time. For a moment, Kiyotaka didn't respond. He hadn't expected to ever see his father again, much less in this vulnerable state. Memories of the White Room flooded his mind, and he felt a surge of conflicting emotions. But there was something different in his father's gaze now, weariness that wasn't there before. A sense of finality. What are you doing here? Kiyotaka finally asked, his voice calm but guarded. Kiyotaka's father, Kei Ayanokoji, exhaled slowly. I've been released from prison. The doctors tell me I have 3 weeks left. Lung cancer. They only let me out because, well, there's no point in keeping a dying man locked up. He glanced down at his trembling hands, then back up at his son. I'm not here to cause trouble, Kiyotaka. I'm here to make amends if you'll allow it. For a moment, silence hung between them. Suzune stepped into the hallway, sensing the tension. She looked at Kiyotaka's father, her expression unreadable, before shifting her gaze to her husband. The Hei's voice softened as he continued, I know I can't undo what I've done, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to spend these last weeks with you. With your family. If you let me. Kiyotaka considered his father's words carefully. He had long believed that the man standing before him was incapable of true remorse. But time had changed many things. Kiyotaka glanced at Suzune, whose gaze met his. She gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod. She had always believed in second chances, even for someone like Kei. Fine, Kiyotaka said quietly. You can stay. But know that we won't forget the past. You'll need to prove that you've changed. Kei nodded solemnly. That's more than I deserve. The days passed slowly but peacefully. Kei stayed in the guest room, and while there was a tension that lingered in the air, there were also moments of quiet reflection. Kei began to build a relationship with Haruto, who had only heard stories of his grandfather but had never met him in person. Despite Haruto's initial hesitation, he couldn't help but be curious about the man who had once been so feared. One evening, as Haruto sat with Kei in the garden, the old man surprised him by handing him a neatly folded envelope. Connections, Kei said gruffly. Powerful ones. Use them wisely. With these contacts, you could go far, Haruto. You could become the Prime Minister of Japan if you wanted. You could do what I couldn't achieve, true greatness. Haruto stared at the envelope, then at his grandfather. Why are you giving me this? Kei smiled faintly. Because despite everything, I see potential in you. You're more of a masterpiece than even Kiyotaka. I wasn't able to shape your father the way I wanted, but you have the chance to surpass both of us. And not through the methods I used, but through your own strength. Haruto nodded, though his mind churned with questions. What is the White Room? Kei's smile faded. A place of control. Of power. A place I created to mold people into tools, like your father. But it wasn't meant for someone like you. You're better than that. You'll achieve greatness without having to go through what your father did. Later that evening, Haruto asked Kiyotaka about the White Room. Kiyotaka, ever calm and measured, explained what it had been. An elite training ground for children, where emotional detachment and intellect were honed to perfection. It was a place of isolation, devoid of love, warmth, or anything resembling a normal childhood. Kiyotaka explained how it shaped him, but also how he had broken free from it, thanks to the life he had built with Suzune. Your grandfather sees people as tools, Haruto, Kiyotaka warned. But I don't. You're my son, and I want you to live your life your way. One evening, Kei joined the family for dinner. Suzune's parents were invited, along with Manabu and his wife, Tachibana. The tension was palpable, especially between Suzune's father and Kei, who had never met but clearly understood the history between their families. However, as dinner progressed, Kei remained respectful, making polite conversation and even sharing some light-hearted memories of Kiyotaka's childhood. Suzune's father, though initially skeptical, found himself grudgingly admitting that Kei seemed sincere in his desire for redemption. As the evening drew to a close, Kei looked around the table at the smiling faces, his expression softening. I know I've done terrible things, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. But seeing all of you here, it gives me hope. I never thought I'd be sitting at a table like this, surrounded by family. Kiyotaka remained silent, watching his father carefully. He could sense the end drawing near, though part of him still found it hard to reconcile the man before him with a figure from his past. The final weeks passed swiftly. Kei grew weaker with each passing day, but he spent as much time as possible with his family. In his final moments, he asked Kiyotaka for one last favor. I know I wasn't the father you needed, Kei said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But I hope I've shown you that I regret it. That I'm sorry. Kiyotaka looked down at his father, his expression unreadable. You've done what you could. But that, Kei Ayanokoji passed away peacefully, surrounded by the family he had once neglected. In the days following Kei's death, the Ayanokoji household felt a sense of closure. They had forgiven, if not forgotten, the past. Kiyotaka and Suzune found peace in knowing that they had given Kei the chance to redeem himself, while Haruto had learned valuable lessons about power, ambition, and family. As they stood together in the garden, Haruto turned to his parents, his voice steady. I won't follow in his footsteps. I'll make my own path. Kiyotaka smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. That's all we've ever wanted for you. Chapter 17 Family Holiday P1 France. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the city as the Ayanokoji family made their way to the airport. It was the beginning of a much-anticipated holiday and escape to France. For the first time in years, they were taking a break from their busy lives to explore a new country together. Kiyotaka, Suzune, and their son Haruto, now a confident and mature 18-year-old, were excited to immerse themselves in the culture, history, and beauty of France. As they boarded the plane, the excitement in the air was palpable. Haruto was especially thrilled. It was his first time traveling to Europe. He had spent weeks researching the places they would visit, eager to experience everything France had to offer. Suzune, too, was looking forward to the trip, her eyes sparkling with anticipation as she settled into her seat beside Kiyotaka. The flight was long but comfortable, and before they knew it, they were descending into Charles de Gaulle Airport. The bustling city of Paris lay just beyond the airport, a vibrant tapestry of art, history, and romance. As they exited the airport and caught their first glimpse of the city, a sense of awe washed over them. Welcome to Paris, Kiyotaka said with a small smile, taking in the grandeur of the cityscape. Suzune and Haruto exchanged excited glances, eager to begin their adventure. Their first stop was their hotel, a charming boutique establishment in the heart of the city. The rooms were elegantly decorated, with large windows that offered stunning views of the Eiffel Tower in the distance. Haruto immediately pulled out his phone to capture the moment, snapping pictures of the view before turning to his parents with a grin. "This is incredible," Haruto said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can't believe we're finally here." Suzune smiled, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "We've been looking forward to this trip for a long time. Let's make the most of it." After freshening up, the family set out to explore Paris. Their first destination was the Louvre, one of the most famous museums in the world. As they wandered through the halls, they marveled at the masterpieces on display, from the enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa to the grandeur of the winged victory of Samothrace. Haruto was particularly fascinated by the ancient artifacts, his eyes wide with curiosity as he examined each exhibit. Kiyotaka, ever the observer, noticed how the museum's atmosphere brought out a different side of his son. Haruto was usually so composed and focused, but here, he was like a child discovering a new world, his enthusiasm contagious. After spending several hours at the Louvre, the family took a leisurely stroll along the Seine River. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the city as they walked hand in hand, taking in the sights and sounds of Paris. They passed by charming cafes, street performers, and vendors selling crepes and pastries, the aroma of freshly baked goods filling the air. As they reached the Eiffel Tower, the iconic structure loomed above them, illuminated by thousands of twinkling lights. Haruto stared up at it in awe, while Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged a knowing smile. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Let's go up," Suzune suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The elevator ride to the top was filled with anticipation, and when they finally stepped out onto the observation deck, the view took their breath away. Paris stretched out below them, a sea of lights and life, the city seemingly endless from their vantage point. "This is amazing," Haruto whispered, leaning on the railing as he took in the view. "I've never seen anything like it." Kiyotaka placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze also fixed on the city below. "It's a reminder of how vast the world is and how much there is to explore." Suzune nodded, her expression thoughtful as she looked out at the horizon. "And how important it is to take moments like this to step back and appreciate the beauty around us." As they stood there, the cool evening breeze ruffling their hair, they felt a deep sense of connection not just to the city, but to each other. It was a moment they knew they would cherish forever. The next day, the Ayanokoji family continued their exploration of Paris. They visited the Notre Dame Cathedral, where they marveled at the Gothic architecture and the intricate stained glass windows. They strolled through the Luxembourg Gardens, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere and the vibrant flowers in bloom. And, of course, they indulged in the local cuisine, sampling everything from croissants and macarons to escargot and coq au vin. Haruto was particularly captivated by the history of the city. As they toured the Palace of Versailles, he listened intently to the guide's explanations of the opulent rooms, the Hall of Mirrors, and the sprawling gardens. He asked questions about the French Revolution, the rise and fall of Napoleon, and the cultural impact of the Enlightenment, his thirst for knowledge insatiable. Suzune watched her son with pride, impressed by his curiosity and intellect. She knew that Haruto was destined for great things, but she was also grateful that he was taking the time to appreciate the world around him, just as she and Kiyotaka had always encouraged him to do. The highlight of their trip was a visit to Montmartre, the historic artistic district of Paris. They climbed the steps to the Basilica of the Sacré-Cœur, where they were rewarded with another breathtaking view of the city. As they wandered through the narrow streets, they encountered artists sketching portraits, musicians playing in the squares, and small shops selling unique handcrafted items. Haruto insisted on having his portrait drawn by one of the street artists, a decision that amused Kiyotaka and Suzune. They watched as the artist captured Haruto's likeness with surprising accuracy, the finished portrait a keepsake that would always remind them of this special trip. On their final evening in Paris, the family enjoyed a quiet dinner at a cozy bistro. The restaurant was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, with candlelit tables and a warm, inviting atmosphere. They talked about their favorite moments from the trip, the places they had seen, and the memories they had made. "I think this has been the best trip of my life," Haruto said, his voice sincere as he looked at his parents. "Thank you for bringing me here." Kiyotaka smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Suzune's hand. "We're glad you enjoyed it. We wanted to give you something special before you start the next chapter of your life." Suzune nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "And we're so proud of the person you've become, Haruto. You've achieved so much, but you've also remained kind, thoughtful, and true to yourself." Haruto smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He knew that his parents' love and support had been the foundation of everything he had accomplished, and he was grateful beyond words. As they left the restaurant and walked back to their hotel, the streets of Paris were quiet, the city settling into a peaceful slumber. The Ayanokoji family walked hand in hand, the bond between them stronger than ever. They knew that this trip was more than just a vacation, it was a celebration of the life they had built together, the love they shared, and the bright future that lay ahead. And as they boarded the plane the next morning, leaving behind the City of Lights, they knew that the memories they had made in France would stay with them forever. Chapter 17 P2 England. After the unforgettable journey through France, the Ayanokoji family set their sights on the next leg of their European tour. England. The transition from the romantic streets of Paris to the historic and bustling atmosphere of London brought a fresh wave of excitement to their travels. Haruto, Kiyotaka, and Suzune were eager to explore the rich history and vibrant culture of a country that had played such a significant role in shaping the modern world. As their plane touched down at Heathrow Airport, Haruto gazed out the window at the overcast sky, feeling a sense of anticipation. England was a place he had always been fascinated by, with its storied past, famous landmarks, and influential figures. He couldn't wait to walk the streets of London, visit iconic sites, and immerse himself in the history of this ancient land. Their first destination was, of course, the heart of London. The family checked into a luxurious hotel in Westminster, with a stunning view of the Thames River and the Houses of Parliament. The city buzzed with energy, a blend of old-world charm and modern vibrancy. As they settled into their room, the iconic chimes of Big Ben echoed in the distance, reminding them that they were truly in one of the world's greatest cities. Their first day in London was spent exploring the city's most famous landmarks. They began with the Tower of London, where they marveled at the crown jewels and learned about the fortress's dark history. Haruto was particularly intrigued by the stories of the infamous prisoners who had once been held there, including Anne Boleyn and Guy Fawkes. The tour guide's tales of intrigue, betrayal, and power captivated his imagination, making the visit even more memorable. From there, they took a leisurely walk along the Thames, crossing the iconic Tower Bridge and stopping for lunch at a riverside cafe. The afternoon was spent at the British Museum, where Haruto's love for history was further fueled by the incredible collection of artifacts from around the world. He spent hours examining the Rosetta Stone, the Elgin marbles, and the mummies of ancient Egypt, his eyes wide with wonder as he absorbed the wealth of knowledge before him. Suzune and Kiyotaka, meanwhile, were content to watch their son's enthusiasm, sharing quiet smiles as they strolled through the museum's vast halls. They knew that this trip was more than just a vacation, it was an opportunity for Haruto to expand his horizons, to see the world beyond Japan, and to appreciate the diverse cultures and histories that shaped humanity. The following days were filled with more adventures. They visited Buckingham Palace, where they watched the changing of the guard and took a ride on the London Eye, enjoying panoramic views of the city. They explored Westminster Abbey, the final resting place of many British monarchs and historical figures, and took a tour of the Houses of Parliament, learning about the inner workings of the British government. One of the highlights of their trip was a visit to the Warner Bros. Studio tour in Leavesden, just outside of London. As lifelong fans of the Harry Potter series, the Ayanokoji family was thrilled to step into the magical world of Hogwarts. They walked through the Great Hall, explored Diagon Alley, and even got a glimpse of the Forbidden Forest. Haruto, who had grown up reading the books and watching the movies, was particularly excited to see the sets and props up close. He couldn't resist trying on a wizard's robe and waving a wand, much to the amusement of his parents. After a week in London, the family decided to venture out into the English countryside. They rented a car and drove through the picturesque landscapes of the Cotswolds, a region known for its charming villages, rolling hills, and historic manor houses. The golden stone cottages, quaint tea rooms, and blooming gardens made for a peaceful retreat from the hustle and bustle of the city. Their next stop was Oxford, home to one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in the world. Haruto, with his academic inclinations, was particularly excited to visit the university's famous colleges, libraries, and museums. They took a guided tour of Christ Church College, where they learned about the college's illustrious alumni, including Lewis Carroll, author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Haruto was fascinated by the history of the institution and couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to study in such a storied place. Kiyotaka and Suzune, meanwhile, enjoyed the tranquil beauty of the city, strolling through the lush college gardens and along the banks of the river Cherwell. They also took the opportunity to visit the Bodleian Library, one of the oldest libraries in Europe, where they marveled at the vast collection of rare books and manuscripts. The final leg of their journey took them to the historic city of Bath, famous for its Roman baths and Georgian architecture. The family spent a relaxing day at the Thermi Bath Spa, where they soaked in the warm, mineral-rich waters, enjoying the panoramic views of the city from the rooftop pool. Haruto, who had read about the ancient Romans in his history classes, was particularly interested in the well-preserved ruins of the Roman baths, where he learned about the city's long history as a spa town. As their time in England drew to a close, the Ayanokoji family reflected on the incredible experiences they had shared. They had explored ancient castles, walked in the footsteps of scholars, and immersed themselves in the rich history and culture of a country that had left an indelible mark on the world. But more importantly, they had strengthened their bond as a family, creating memories that would last a lifetime. On their last night in England, they returned to London for a special dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Thames. As they dined on exquisite cuisine, they reminisced about their favorite moments from the trip, from the awe-inspiring landmarks to the quiet moments of reflection in the countryside. "I think this trip has been even better than I imagined," Haruto said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for bringing me here." Kiyotaka smiled, his heart swelling with pride as he looked at his son. "We're glad you enjoyed it. This trip was meant to be a celebration of everything you've accomplished and a reminder of the world that's out there waiting for you." Suzune nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "And it's also a reminder that no matter where life takes us, we'll always have each other. That's the most important thing." As they raised their glasses in a toast to family, love, and the adventures that lay ahead, they knew that this journey had been more than just a vacation. It had been a celebration of life, of the bond they shared, and of the bright future that awaited them. And as they prepared to return home to Japan, they knew that the memories of their time in England would stay with them forever. Chapter 17 P3 Idly. After their incredible adventures in France and England, the Ayanokoji family set their sights on Italy, a country renowned for its rich history, breathtaking art, and world-famous cuisine. The anticipation was palpable as they boarded their flight from London to Rome, ready to immerse themselves in a land that had once been the heart of the Roman Empire. As the plane descended towards Leonardo da Vinci Airport, Haruto gazed out the window, captivated by the sprawling city below. Rome was a place he had only read about in history books and seen in movies. The idea of walking through the same streets where emperors, gladiators, and artists had once roamed filled him with excitement. Upon arrival, the family checked into a luxurious hotel near the Spanish Steps, a perfect location for exploring the city. The first thing that struck them was the unique blend of ancient history and modern life. Rome was a city where centuries-old ruins stood side by side with bustling cafes, and where every street seemed to whisper tales of the past. Their first day in Rome was dedicated to exploring the city's most iconic landmarks. They began with a visit to the Colosseum, the enormous amphitheater that had once hosted gladiatorial games and public spectacles. As they walked through the ancient corridors and stood in the arena, Haruto couldn't help but imagine the roaring crowds and the fierce battles that had taken place there. The sheer scale of the structure left him in awe, and he spent a long time studying the intricate details of the architecture, fascinated by how such a massive building had been constructed so long ago. Next, they made their way to the Roman Forum, the heart of ancient Rome. As they wandered through the ruins of temples, basilicas, and public spaces, Kiyotaka and Suzune shared stories about the history of the Roman Republic and Empire, helping Haruto to appreciate the significance of what he was seeing. They stood before the Arch of Titus, marveled at the Temple of Saturn, and imagined what life must have been like in the bustling marketplace that once thrived in the Forum. As the afternoon sun began to set, they headed to the Pantheon, one of Rome's most well-preserved ancient buildings. The massive dome, with its central oculus open to the sky, was a marvel of engineering, and Haruto was particularly impressed by the fact that it had remained standing for nearly 2,000 years. The serene atmosphere inside the Pantheon, with its softly filtered light and majestic statues, provided a moment of quiet reflection for the family. The next day, the Ayanokouji ventured to Vatican City, the smallest independent state in the world and the spiritual center of the Roman Catholic Church. Their first stop was St. Peter's Basilica, an architectural masterpiece that left them speechless with its grandeur. As they entered the basilica, they were greeted by the awe-inspiring sight of Michelangelo's Pieta, a sculpture that perfectly captured the sorrow and tenderness of Mary holding the body of Jesus. Haruto, who had always admired Michelangelo's work, was moved by the beauty and emotion of the sculpture. They then climbed to the top of St. Peter's Dome, where they were rewarded with a breathtaking view of Rome. The city stretched out before them, a sea of terracotta rooftops, winding streets, and ancient ruins. From this vantage point, they could truly appreciate the scale and beauty of Rome, a city that had been at the center of so much history. In the afternoon, they visited the Vatican Museums, home to one of the world's most important art collections. They wandered through gallery after gallery, admiring masterpieces by Raphael, Caravaggio, and Leonardo da Vinci. But the highlight of the visit was, of course, the Sistine Chapel. As they stood beneath Michelangelo's famous frescoes, depicting the creation of Adam and the Last Judgment, they were filled with a sense of reverence and wonder. Haruto, who had studied the frescoes and art history, was particularly struck by the vivid colors and the sheer scale of the work. Their time in Rome also included more leisurely pursuits. They tossed coins into the Trevi fountain, ensuring their return to the Eternal City, and enjoyed gelato as they strolled through the picturesque streets of Trastevere. They spent an afternoon in the Borghese Gardens, where they rented bikes and explored the park's beautiful sculptures and fountains. After several days in Rome, the family decided to explore more of Italy. Their next stop was Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance and home to some of the most famous art and architecture in the world. The city's narrow cobblestone streets, lined with elegant palazzos and bustling markets, were a delight to explore. In Florence, they visited the Uffizi Gallery, where they marveled at works by Botticelli, Titian, and Leonardo da Vinci. Haruto was particularly captivated by Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, a painting he had seen many times in textbooks but never imagined he would see in person. The delicate beauty of the goddess rising from the sea, surrounded by flowing drapery and ethereal figures, left him in awe. They also visited the Accademia Gallery, where they stood before Michelangelo's David, the iconic sculpture that embodied the ideals of Renaissance humanism. The sheer size and perfection of the statue were overwhelming, and Haruto spent a long time examining the details of the muscles, veins, and expression, trying to understand how Michelangelo had managed to create such a lifelike figure from a block of marble. Their time in Florence was filled with other memorable experiences as well. They climbed to the top of the Duomo, Brunelleschi's masterpiece, for a panoramic view of the city, and they visited the Medici Chapel, where they learned about the powerful family that had shaped much of Florence's history. They also took a day trip to the Tuscan countryside, where they visited vineyards, tasted local wines, and enjoyed a traditional Italian meal in a rustic farmhouse. As their journey through Italy continued, the Ayanokouji made their way to Venice, the city of canals. The moment they arrived, they were enchanted by the city's unique atmosphere. The narrow, winding streets, the gondolas gliding silently through the canals, and the beautiful palazzos reflected in the water all combined to create a magical setting. In Venice, they visited St. Mark's Basilica, with its stunning mosaics and intricate domes, and they climbed the Campanile for a breathtaking view of the city. They explored the Doge's palace, learning about the history of Venice's powerful rulers, and they wandered through the maze-like streets of the city, discovering hidden squares, quaint cafes, and artisan shops. One of the highlights of their time in Venice was a gondola ride through the Grand Canal. As they glided past the beautiful palazzos and under the city's famous bridges, they were serenaded by their gondolier, who sang traditional Italian songs. The ride was a perfect way to experience the romance and charm of Venice, and it left the family with memories they would cherish forever. As their time in Italy came to an end, the Ayanokoji family reflected on the incredible experiences they had shared. They had explored ancient ruins, stood before masterpieces of art, and immersed themselves in the rich culture and history of a country that had left an indelible mark on the world. But more than that, they had grown closer as a family, sharing moments of wonder, learning, and joy that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. On their last night in Italy, they dined at a rooftop restaurant in Venice, overlooking the Grand Canal. As they watched the sunset over the city, casting a golden glow over the water, they raised their glasses in a toast to the adventures they had shared and the memories they had made. To Italy, Kiyotaka said, his voice filled with warmth. And to the incredible journey we've had together. Suzune and Haruto echoed his words, their hearts full as they looked out over the city. They knew that their time in Italy had been more than just a vacation, it had been a celebration of life, love, and the bond they shared as a family. And as they prepared to return home, they knew that the memories of their time in Italy would stay with them forever. Chapter 20 Homecoming Surprise. After a whirlwind tour across Europe, the Ayanokoji family finally returned home, their hearts full of cherished memories and their suitcases packed with souvenirs from their travels. The long flight from Venice to Tokyo had been exhausting, but there was a sense of contentment as they drove back to their house. The familiar sights of their neighborhood brought a wave of comfort, reminding them that there's no place quite like home. As they pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the house. Suzune smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace now that they were back. Kiyotaka parked the car, and the family began unloading their luggage. Haruto, though still tired from the trip, moved with an eagerness that hinted at something more than just the relief of being home. Suzune and Kiyotaka exchanged a knowing glance. They had a feeling Haruto was excited for another reason entirely. Haruto, Suzune said with a teasing smile, are you planning to stay in touch with all the new friends you made in Europe? Haruto, slightly flustered, responded with a shrug. Maybe, but I've got a lot of messages to catch up on first. Kiyotaka raised an eyebrow. I'm sure someone special is waiting for you to get back. Before Haruto could reply, the front door swung open, and there stood Sayori Tanaka, Haruto's girlfriend. She was beaming, her eyes lighting up with excitement as she saw Haruto. Sayori was a beautiful young woman with long, sleek black hair and bright, intelligent eyes that reflected a blend of kindness and determination. She had been the vice president of the student council and had earned her spot as one of the top students at the advanced nurturing high school, just like Haruto. Welcome back. Sayori called out, waving cheerfully. She quickly made her way down the steps to greet them. Haruto's face broke into a wide smile, and before he knew it, Sayori had wrapped her arms around him in a warm embrace. I've missed you so much, she whispered, her voice filled with affection. I missed you too, Haruto replied, holding her tightly. The two of them stayed like that for a moment, oblivious to the world around them. Suzune and Kiyotaka watched the scene with a mixture of amusement and pride. Their son had grown up so much, and seeing him in love was a reminder of how quickly time had passed. "Sayori, it's good to see you," Suzune said warmly as they approached the young couple. "It's great to see you too, Mrs. Ayanokoji," Sayori responded with a smile, bowing respectfully. "I hope you all had a wonderful trip." "We did," Kiyotaka said, his voice calm and steady as always. "But it's good to be home." Sayori nodded, then turned her attention back to Haruto. "I was just passing by and thought I'd check to see if you were back yet. I didn't expect you'd arrive so soon." Haruto smiled, his eyes reflecting his happiness at seeing her. "I'm glad you came by. I couldn't wait to see you." Kiyotaka cleared his throat softly, a subtle reminder that they weren't alone. "Why don't we all go inside and get settled?" he suggested. "I'm sure Haruto has plenty of stories to share." The group made their way inside the house, where the familiar scents and warmth welcomed them. Haruto and Sayori quickly took their usual seats in the living room, while Kiyotaka and Suzune busied themselves with unpacking some essentials from their luggage. "So, how was Europe?" Sayori asked eagerly, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Haruto leaned back on the couch, smiling as he recounted their adventures. "It was amazing. We visited so many incredible places: Rome, Florence, Venice, the history, the art, the food, it was all unforgettable." As Haruto shared the highlights of their trip, Sayori listened intently, hanging on every word. She couldn't help but be impressed by the experiences he had gained, but she also felt a twinge of envy that she hadn't been able to join him. Still, she was genuinely happy for him, knowing how much this trip meant to his family. Kiyotaka and Suzune soon joined them in the living room, adding their own anecdotes and insights into the conversation. The room was filled with laughter as they recounted some of the lighter moments of the trip, like the time Haruto had accidentally ordered a dish in Italian that turned out to be far spicier than he expected, or when they got lost in the maze-like streets of Venice, only to discover a hidden cafe with the best tiramisu they'd ever tasted. After a while, the conversation turned to the future. Haruto, who had just graduated at the top of his class, was preparing for university, and there were big decisions ahead. "Have you decided on where you want to go yet?" Sayori asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. She knew how important this decision was for both of them. "I've narrowed it down to a few places," Haruto replied, glancing at his parents. "But I'm still thinking about it. I want to make sure it's the right fit." "You'll figure it out," Suzune said confidently. "You've always had a clear vision of what you want to achieve. Just trust your instincts." Kiyotaka nodded in agreement. "And remember, no matter where you go, we're here to support you." Haruto smiled, feeling reassured by his parents' words. "Thanks, Mom, Dad. I really appreciate it." Sayori looked at Haruto, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, I'll be right there with you." The warmth in the room was palpable, a testament to the love and support that surrounded Haruto. As the evening wore on, they continued to talk, share stories, and plan for the future. The joy of being home, surrounded by loved ones, was a perfect ending to their European adventure. As they all settled in for the night, Haruto couldn't help but feel grateful for everything he had: his family, his girlfriend, and the exciting future that lay ahead. No matter what challenges or opportunities came his way, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had a strong support system and the confidence that came from knowing who he was and where he came from. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest gift his parents could have given him. Chapter 21: Grandparents. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the leaves had just begun their colorful transition to hues of orange and gold. The Ayanokoji household was unusually quiet, with Kiyotaka and Suzune enjoying a rare moment of peace. Haruto had recently moved into his new house as he started his university life, and the house seemed emptier without the usual bustle of their son. Kiyotaka was sitting in his study, going over some documents when he heard the sound of the doorbell ringing. He glanced at the clock. It was a bit unusual for someone to visit at this hour. Suzune, who had been reading a book in the living room, stood up and walked towards the door. When she opened it, she was greeted by Sayori Tanaka, Haruto's girlfriend, who was holding a small package wrapped in a delicate ribbon. Sayori's face was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Hello, Mrs. Ayanokoji," Sayori said, her voice trembling slightly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Suzune's curiosity was piqued, and she stepped aside to let Sayori in. "Not at all. Please come in. What brings you here today?" Sayori entered, her hand slightly trembling as she clutched the package. "I actually have something to share with you and Mr. Ayanokoji. It's kind of important." Kiyotaka, hearing the conversation, came out of his study and greeted Sayori. "Hello, Sayori. What's this about?" Sayori gave a nervous smile and handed the package to Suzune. "Please open it." Suzune carefully untied the ribbon and peeled back the wrapping to reveal a small box. Inside, nestled among some tissue paper, was a framed ultrasound image of a baby. Suzune's eyes widened as she took in the image, her mind racing to understand what she was seeing. Kiyotaka, noticing his wife's reaction, stepped closer and looked at the picture. His heart skipped a beat as he realized what it meant. He glanced at Sayuri, whose nervousness had now turned into a hopeful smile. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Suzune asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Sayuri nodded, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes, I'm pregnant. Haruto and I are going to have a baby." For a moment, there was silence as Kiyotaka and Suzune processed the news. Then, a wave of emotions hit them. Kiyotaka's usually composed demeanor softened and a broad smile spread across his face. His eyes were moist as he reached out to gently touch Suzune's arm. "This is incredible news," Kiyotaka said, his voice thick with emotion. "Congratulations, Sayuri." Suzune, her eyes also filled with tears, embraced Sayuri warmly. "I'm so happy for you both. This is such wonderful news." Sayuri hugged Suzune back, her tears now flowing freely. "Thank you. I was so nervous about telling you. I didn't know how you would react." "Haruto and you have always been special to us," Suzune said, her voice choked with emotion. "And now, our family is growing. We couldn't be happier." Kiyotaka cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "I think we need to celebrate this. Let's call Haruto and share the news with him." Suzune nodded, reaching for her phone. As she dialed Haruto's number, Kiyotaka and Sayuri stood by, their excitement palpable. "Hello?" Haruto's voice came through the line, a note of surprise in his tone. "Mom? Dad? What's up?" "We have something important to tell you," Suzune said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sayuri is here and she has some news." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of news?" Suzune took a deep breath and said, "Haruto, Sayuri is pregnant. You're going to be a father." There was a moment of stunned silence before Haruto's voice came back, filled with awe and excitement. "Are you serious? That's amazing. I can't believe it." Kiyotaka took the phone from Suzune, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "Haruto, we're so proud and happy for you both. We can't wait to meet our grandchild." Haruto's voice was filled with emotion. "Thank you. We're really excited too. I'll be coming over as soon as I can to celebrate with you." As they ended the call, Kiyotaka and Suzune turned to Sayuri, their hearts full of joy. They began making plans for a small celebration, eager to share their happiness with their friends and family. Later that evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Kiyotaka and Suzune sat together in their living room, reflecting on the incredible news. "I can hardly believe it," Suzune said, leaning her head on Kiyotaka's shoulder. "We're going to be grandparents." Kiyotaka wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "It's a new chapter for our family and I couldn't be happier. We've watched Haruto grow into a wonderful young man and now he's starting his own family. It's a beautiful thing." Suzune nodded, her heart swelling with pride and love. "It really is. I'm so excited to see what the future holds for them and for us as grandparents." As they sat there, enveloped in the warmth of their home, they knew that this was the beginning of another incredible journey, one filled with new joys, challenges, and the boundless love of family. The news of their grandchild had brought them even closer together and they were ready to embrace this new chapter with open hearts. Chapter 22 Baby. The air was filled with a soft, expectant buzz as Suzune and Kiyotaka made their way to the hospital. The anticipation of meeting their grandchild for the first time was palpable, making every minute feel like an eternity. They had spent the past few weeks preparing for this moment and the day had finally arrived. Sayuri had called them early that morning with the news that she was in labor and Haruto had kept them updated throughout the day. Now, as the time drew closer, the excitement in the waiting room was almost tangible. Suzune clutched Kiyotaka's hand tightly, her heart racing with a mix of joy and nervousness. After what seemed like an eternity, a nurse approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Ayanokoji, you can come in now. Mother and baby are doing well." Suzune's heart leapt at the news. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She squeezed Kiyotaka's hand as they followed the nurse down the hallway, each step bringing them closer to the moment they had been eagerly anticipating. They were led into a cozy, softly lit room where Sayuri lay in bed, looking radiant despite the exhaustion of labor. Haruto stood by her side, his face a mixture of relief, pride, and overwhelming joy. When he saw his parents, he immediately moved to greet them. "Mom, Dad," Haruto said, his voice filled with emotion. "She's here. You can meet your grandchild now." Sayuri, her face glowing with a tired but triumphant smile, held out her arms towards a small crib beside her bed. Inside, wrapped snugly in a soft blue blanket, was a tiny baby, sleeping peacefully. The sight of their grandchild, so small and perfect, took Suzune and Kiyotaka's breath away. Kiyotaka stepped closer to the crib, his eyes misting over as he looked down at the baby. "He's beautiful," he said softly, his voice choked with emotion. "What's his name?" His name is Kazuki, Sayori said gently, her voice tender as she looked at her newborn son. Kazuki Ayanokoji. Suzune's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. Kazuki, it's a lovely name. Naruto wrapped his arm around Sayori, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Thank you for everything, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've given us a precious gift. Sayori smiled, her eyes full of love and fatigue. Thank you for being here with us. It means a lot. Kiyotaka took a deep breath, fighting back his tears. He carefully picked up the tiny bundle from the crib, holding Kazuki in his arms with a tenderness that only a grandparent could feel. The baby stirred slightly but remained asleep, oblivious to the emotional upheaval he had caused. This is the start of a new chapter, Suzune said, her voice soft but filled with warmth. And I'm so grateful to be here to experience it with you. Kiyotaka nodded, his eyes locked on the tiny face in his arms. Yes, it is. We've watched Haruto grow into an incredible person, and now we have the joy of seeing him become a father. It's more than we could have ever hoped for. As the family settled into a quiet, intimate moment, the hospital room was filled with a sense of peace and contentment. The new parents and grandparents took turns holding Kazuki, their hearts swelling with love for the tiny new member of their family. Later, as the evening fell and the room grew quieter, Kiyotaka and Suzune prepared to leave, allowing the new family some time to rest. They shared their heartfelt congratulations and promises to visit often. We'll come back tomorrow, Suzune said, leaning in to kiss Sayori's cheek. Rest well and enjoy these first precious moments with Kazuki. Thank you, Sayori replied, her eyes shining with gratitude. We're so happy you're here. As they left the hospital, Suzune and Kiyotaka walked hand in hand, their hearts full of love and pride. The arrival of Kazuki had brought a new sense of joy and completeness to their lives. They knew that this was just the beginning of a wonderful journey, one filled with the boundless love and happiness that comes with family. Back at their home, Suzune and Kiyotaka sat together, reflecting on the day's events. The house was quiet, but the sense of joy was overwhelming. It's hard to believe how quickly things have changed, Suzune said, her voice filled with wonder. Kiyotaka nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yes, it's incredible. But seeing Kazuki, I know that everything we've been through has led us to this moment. It's all been worth it. They looked at each other, sharing a moment of deep connection and understanding. The future was bright, and with Kazuki now part of their lives, they felt a renewed sense of purpose and excitement. As they turned off the lights and prepared for bed, they knew that their family had grown in a way they had always dreamed of. The arrival of their grandson had brought them closer together, and they were ready to embrace every moment of this new chapter with open hearts. Chapter 23, reflecting on a life well lived. The soft glow of the moonlight filtered through the curtains of the Ayanokoji's bedroom, casting a serene, silvery light across the room. The peaceful atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the bustling world outside. Kiyotaka, now on the brink of his 60th birthday, lay beside Suzune in their comfortable bed, the weight of the years and the joy of their life together reflected in his contemplative gaze. It had been over 45 years since they had first met at school, and their journey together had been nothing short of extraordinary. Their family had flourished. Their eldest grandson, Kazuki, was thriving in Class A at Ayanokoji High School, following in his parents' impressive footsteps. Their two younger grandchildren, a lively 10-year-old boy named Riku and a bright 8-year-old girl named Emi, had brought even more joy into their lives. Suzune, her hair now streaked with silver like Kiyotaka's, lay beside him, her head resting on the pillow as she softly stroked his hair. The peaceful quiet of the night provided the perfect backdrop for Kiyotaka's reflections. Kiyotaka turned his head to face Suzune, his eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. Suzune, he began, his voice gentle but full of emotion. I've been thinking about everything about us, about our life together. Suzune's eyes met his, a tender smile playing on her lips. What's on your mind, Kiyotaka? Kiyotaka took a deep breath, the memories of their long journey together flooding his mind. It's amazing to think about how far we've come. I remember when we first met and all the challenges we faced. It feels like a lifetime ago. Suzune's smile grew as she gently ran her fingers through his now gray hair, a sign of the many years they had shared. It has been a long journey. But look at us now, our family, our life together. It's more than I ever could have imagined. Kiyotaka nodded, his gaze drifting to the framed family photos on the nightstand. Yes, it is. We've been blessed with so much. Kazuki is doing so well, and Riku and Emi bring so much joy into our lives. I'm so proud of all of them. A contented sigh escaped Suzune's lips as she snuggled closer to Kiyotaka. They're wonderful. And I'm proud of everything we've built together. It's been a beautiful journey. Kiyotaka's eyes glistened as he continued, I keep thinking about how fortunate I am. To have you by my side through everything, to have a family that loves and supports each other, it's more than I ever deserved. I've never been happier than I am right now. Suzune's heart swelled with love as she looked at Kiyotaka. She had seen him through so many stages of life, through triumphs, struggles, and everything in between. I feel the same way, Kiyotaka. Our life together has been full of love and happiness. I wouldn't change a thing. Kiyotaka's expression softened and he reached out to gently hold Suzune's hand. I remember how worried we were about the future, about whether we'd be able to overcome the challenges we faced. But we did. We made it through and we created a life filled with love and joy. Suzune squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. And it's all because of us, working together and never giving up. We've created something truly special. Kiyotaka's voice was filled with a deep sense of appreciation. I'm grateful for every moment we've had, the good and the bad. They've all been part of our journey and they've brought us to this place of happiness. As they lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside seemed to fade away. The years had brought their share of challenges, but they had faced them together, growing stronger with each passing day. Suzune leaned in and placed a soft kiss on Kiyotaka's cheek. Happy early birthday, my love. You've given me a lifetime of happiness and I'm so grateful for every moment we've shared. Kiyotaka turned his head to meet her gaze, his eyes filled with a profound love. Thank you, Suzune. I'm the happiest I've ever been and it's all because of you. They held each other close, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. The night continued its gentle watch over them and as they drifted off to sleep, they knew that their love had stood the test of time, growing stronger with each passing year. In the morning, as Kiyotaka's 60th birthday dawned, the house would be filled with the warmth of family and celebration. But for now, in the stillness of the night, they cherished the simple joy of being together, reflecting on a lifetime of love and looking forward to the many more moments they would share. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.